The Iliad of Homer. Homer. Homer's Iliad, translated by Richmond Lattimore, is the foundational epic of Western literature, a poem of roughly 15,700 lines of dactylic hexameter recounting 24 days in the 10th year of the Trojan War. This forensic examination follows the poem's arc from the wrath of Achilles through the death of Hector and the old man Priam's journey to recover his son's body, tracing the epic's meditation on mortality, glory, rage, and the terrible beauty of human struggle against the inevitability of death. Abstract. Homer's Iliad, in Richmond Lattimore's translation, is the foundational poem of Western literature, a work of roughly 15,700 lines of dactylic hexameter that recounts 24 days in the 10th year of the Trojan War. This forensic examination follows the poem's arc from the wrath of Achilles through the death of Hector and the old man Priam's journey to recover his son's body. The Iliad is not a poem about victory, but about the human condition, mortality, glory, rage, and the terrible beauty of struggle against the inevitability of death. Its enduring power lies not in its battles, but in its silences, the moment when killer and father sit together in shared grief, when the war is held at bay by a single act of supplication, and when burial restores to the body the dignity that violence strips away. Executive summary. Central thesis. The Iliad traces the catastrophic consequences of a single rupture in heroic society. Achilles' withdrawal from battle after Agamemnon seizes his war prize Briseis, and follows that rupture through its full arc. The suffering it causes on both sides, the death of Patroclus that forces Achilles back into the war, and the final movement from wrath to grief to burial. The poem's deepest argument is that mortality is the ground of all human meaning. It is because mortals die that their choices matter, that love is precious, and that the recognition of shared suffering across enemy lines constitutes the highest form of wisdom. Foundational observations. The wrath as structural engine. Achilles' menace is not merely an emotional outburst, but the poem's governing principle, a force that reshapes the war's trajectory, costs thousands of lives, and ultimately transforms the wrathful hero into a figure of grief. The poem begins with wrath and ends with burial, and in that arc lies its understanding of what it means to be human. Heroic society and its fragilities. The quarrel between Achilles and Agamemnon reveals the contradictions of a society where honor, time, is simultaneously the source of meaning and the cause of destruction. The poem does not endorse the heroic code, but examines it with unflinching clarity, showing how the same values that produce extraordinary courage also produce extraordinary cruelty. The gods as forces beyond human control. The divine apparatus of the Iliad is not a system of moral governance, but a reflection of the arbitrary, uncontrollable forces that shape human destiny. Zeus's plan to honor Achilles by letting the Achaeans suffer is not just, but it is inexorable, and the poem asks us to accept that the universe is not organized around human notions of fairness. Mortality as the ground of meaning. The poem's meditation on death, expressed through the choices of Achilles, Hector, and Priam, argues that it is precisely because mortals die that their lives have weight. The shield of Achilles, depicting the whole human world in bronze, is the antithesis of war. Civilization held in a circle of indestructible metal, carried into killing. Enemy and self. The Iliad's refusal to demonize the Trojans, its insistence that Hector is as admirable as Achilles, that Andromache's grief is as real as Briseis', constitutes its most radical ethical claim, that the recognition of shared humanity across enemy lines is the beginning of wisdom. Significance and recommendation. The Iliad remains indispensable not because it is classical, but because it asks the questions that every generation must answer. What do we owe to those we fight? What does it mean to choose glory over life? And how do we mourn what we have destroyed? Readers approaching the poem for the first time should read it not as a historical artifact, but as a living meditation on the human condition, one that speaks with equal force to soldiers and scholars, to the ancient world and the modern. Lattimore's translation, with its fidelity to Homeric rhythm and formula, preserves the poem's oral power while making it accessible to contemporary English. This summary is offered as a guide to the poem's argument and art, not as a substitute for the experience of reading it. Book 1. Sing, Muse, of the wrath of Peleus' son Achilles, that ruinous fury which brought tenfold suffering upon the Achaeans, hurled in their myriads down to the house of Hades, the strong souls of heroes given over to the ravenous feasting of dogs and every bird, while the will of Zeus moved toward its appointed end. Begin when the first discord set two men in opposition, Atreus' son, the lord of men, and brilliant Achilles. What god had stirred them to such bitter enmity? The son of Zeus and Leto, Apollo, whose rage fell upon the king and drove a deadly pestilence through the army. Men perished, all because Agamemnon had scorned Apollo's priest. For Chryses came to the swift ships of the Achaeans to ransom back his daughter, bearing gifts past counting and holding aloft, wound upon a staff of gold, the garlands of the far shooter. He supplicated all the Achaeans, but above all the two sons of Atreus, the marshals of the people, sons of Atreus and you other Achaeans, strong grieved, may the gods who dwell on Olympos grant you Priam's city to plunder and a safe homecoming. Only give me back my daughter and accept this ransom, honoring the son of Zeus who strikes from afar. The whole army cried out their assent. Respect the priest, accept the shining ransom. But it brought no joy to the heart of Agamemnon. He dismissed the old man with a brutal command. Never let me find you near these ships again, old man, not lingering now nor returning tomorrow. The staff and the gods' wreaths will not save you. The girl, I will not give her up. Long before that, old age will overtake her in my house in Argos, far from her homeland, forced to share my bed at the loom. Now go, and do not test my wrath, if you value your life. The old man trembled and obeyed, turning away in silence along the shore where the surf crashes and drags. Moving to a safe distance, he prayed aloud to the son of Leto. Hear me, Apollo, god of the silver bow, lord of Chryse and holy Scylla. If I ever roofed a shrine to please you, ever burned the rich bones of bulls and goats upon your altar, bring my prayer to pass. Pay the Danaans back, your arrows for my tears. Phoebos Apollo heard him. He strode down from the peaks of Olympos, dark with fury, the bow and quivered arrows clanging at his back. He dropped to one knee beside the ships and let fly. A terrifying clash rang out from the silver bow. First he struck the mules and dogs, then launched piercing shafts at the men themselves, cutting them down in droves. The funeral pyres burned without cease, night and day, for 9 full days. On the 10th, Achilles called the army to assembly, the thought put into his heart by Hera of the white arms, who pitied the Danaans in their dying multitudes. When they were gathered together, Achilles of the swift feet rose and spoke. Son of Atreus, we must sail home if we hope to escape death itself, if battle and plague together will crush the Achaeans. Let us find some seer or prophet, someone who reads the dreams that come from Zeus, to tell us why Phoebos Apollo is so wrathful, whether some oath or hecatomb has offended him, and whether burnt offerings of lambs and goats might turn his anger aside. He sat down, and Calchas, son of the Istur, rose among them, the best of bird-readers, who knew all things present, future, and past. Standing forward with kindly intent, he spoke. It is not for some oath or hecatomb that Apollo rages, but for his priest whom Agamemnon dishonored, refusing to release his daughter or accept the ransom. The archer's arrows will keep falling until the girl is returned to her father, unransomed and unharmed, and a hecatomb is led to Chryse. Only then will the god's fury be appeased. Athene herself descended from the sky. Hera had sent her, who loved both men, and seized Achilles by his fair hair, visible to him alone, commanding him to sheathe his sword. He obeyed, though oaths poured from his lips. By the scepter of authority, stripped of bark and leaf, he swore that a day would come when the sons of the Achaeans would yearn for Achilles, dropping in their droves before Hector the manslayer, and Agamemnon would eat his heart out in anguish. Then Peleus' son returned to his shelter and his beloved companion Patroclus, and wept beside the gray sea, calling upon his mother Thetis, the silver-footed goddess who rose from the gray water like a mist to cradle her mortal son. Thetis heard his lament and ascended to Olympos, to Zeus of the thunderbolt. She took him by the knees and beseeched him, "Grant honor to my son." She pleaded, short-lived beyond all other mortals. Zeus bowed his head, and the immortal oil streamed from his dark locks, and all of Olympos trembled. Meanwhile, Agamemnon sent heralds to take Briseis of the fair cheeks from Achilles' shelter, and the great rift between the best warrior and the army began to open. The heralds went, unwilling, along the dark shore to where Achilles sat beside his black ships. He did not smile when he saw them, nor spoke a word, but yielded to the will of Zeus. Briseis went with them, glancing back with a girl's reluctant eyes. The plague lifted. The hecatomb to Apollo was offered. Chryseis returned to her father. The god's anger finally quelled. But the cost was Briseis, the prize given to Achilles, now stripped from him by Agamemnon's heralds. Then Achilles, dark with fury, spoke. "Shameless one, mind always fixed on profit. How can any Achaean obey your orders, whether to march to battle or to fight at close quarters? I did not come to Troy for the sake of Trojan spears. They have done me no wrong. Never have they driven off my cattle or my horses. Never in Phthia, where the soil is rich and men grow great, have they spoiled my harvest. Between us lie the shadowy mountains and the echoing sea. But for your sake, O great shamelessness, we followed, to win you honor and Menelaus from the Trojans. And now you would strip my prize from me, for which I labored much, the gift of the sons of the Achaeans. You forget all this, or you never cared." Agamemnon answered in turn, "Go home if your heart drives you. I will not beg you to stay. Others are here who will do me honor, Zeus above all. Of all the kings the gods love, you are the one I hate most. Forever quarreling is your delight, and war and battle. If you are very strong, that is a god's gift. Go, then, back to Phthia with your ships and your myrmidons. I care nothing for you, but hear my threat. Even as Apollo takes my Chryseis from me, I shall send her back in my own ship with my own followers. And I shall go myself to your shelter and take the fair-cheeked Briseis, your prize, so that you may learn at last how much greater I am than you, and another man may think twice before comparing himself to me." Quote, "Sing muse of the wrath of Peleus' son Achilles, that ruinous fury which brought tenfold suffering upon the Achaeans, hurled in their myriads down to the house of Hades, the strong souls of heroes given over to the ravenous feasting of dogs and every bird, while the will of Zeus moved toward its appointed end." Quote, "Hear me, Apollo, god of the silver bow, lord of Chryse and holy Scylla, if I ever roofed a shrine to please you, ever burned the rich bones of bulls and goats upon your altar, bring my prayer to pass. Pay the Danaans back, your arrows for my tears." Book 2. The rest of the gods and all the lords of chariots slept night-long in the easy bondage of slumber, but sleep would not hold Zeus. He turned in his mind how to bring glory to Achilles and destroy many Achaeans beside their ships. The best counsel seemed to be this. He would send a false dream to Agamemnon, son of Atreus. "Go, evil dream, to the swift ships of the Achaeans," Zeus commanded. "Make your way to Agamemnon's shelter. Speak to him word for word exactly as I say. Bid him arm the flowing-haired Achaeans for battle in all haste, for now he might take the wide-wayed city of the Trojans. No longer do the gods on Olympos dispute the matter. Hera's appeals have won them round, and evils wait for the men of Troy." Dream listened and descended, and came to the shelter of Atreus' son, who slept beneath a cloud of immortal slumber. Taking the likeness of Nestor, whom Agamemnon honored above all elders, Dream stood beside his head and spoke. "Son of Atreus, breaker of horses, still asleep? A man burdened with counsels and the care of a people should not sleep the whole night through. Zeus bids you arm the Achaeans for battle in all haste, for now the wide-wayed city of Troy might fall. The gods on Olympos no longer argue. Hera has swayed them, and ruin waits for the Trojans. Hold this thought, and let not forgetfulness take you when sweet sleep releases you." He spoke and departed, leaving Agamemnon believing things in his heart that would never come to pass, for he thought he would take Priam's city that very day. The fool, knowing nothing of all the things Zeus still meant to accomplish, Zeus who yet intended to bring tears and suffering upon Trojans and Danaans alike in the strong encounters. Dawn drew close to Olympos with her message of light, and Agamemnon commanded his clear-voiced heralds to summon the flowing-haired Achaeans to assembly. The heralds cried, and the men assembled swiftly. First he held a council of the high-hearted princes beside Nestor's ship, the old king of Pylos, and told them of the dream that had come in Nestor's likeness, the promise that the wide-wayed city might now be taken. Then Agamemnon rose, holding the scepter that Hephaestus had wrought. Hephaestus gave it to Zeus, Zeus to Hermes, Hermes to Pelops, Pelops to Atreus, Atreus to Thyestes, and Thyestes left it to Agamemnon to carry and to be lord of many islands and all Argos. Leaning upon this scepter he spoke, "Fighting men and friends, O Danaans, henchmen of Ares, Zeus son of Cronos has caught me fast in bitter futility. He promised before that I might sack strong-walled Iliad and sail home. Now he has devised a vile deception and bids me return to Argos in dishonor, having lost many of my people. Such is Zeus's way, who is too strong, who has broken the crests of many cities and will break them again. Come, do as I say. Let us all be won over. Let us sail home to the beloved land of our fathers, for no longer shall we capture Troy of the wide ways." But the army, stirred by 9 years of fruitless siege, surged toward the ships like waves driven by the south and southeast winds. They began to clear the keel channels, and their cries rose skyward. A homecoming beyond fate might have been accomplished had not Hera spoken to Athene. For shame, Atratone, daughter of Zeus of the Aegis. The Argives will flee homeward over the wide ridges of the sea and leave to Priam and the Trojans Helen of Argos, for whose sake so many Achaeans lost their lives far from home. Go now among the bronze-armored Achaeans. Speak to each man with words of gentleness and turn them back. Do not let them drag their ships down to the salt sea. The gray-eyed goddess went in speed from Olympos and came to Odysseus, who stood with disappointment touching his heart, and bade him turn the army back. Odysseus, sacker of cities, took the scepter and went through the host, restraining kings with soft words and striking common men with the staff until the assembly was shaken back into order. He stood up holding the scepter, and gray-eyed Athene in the likeness of a herald enjoined silence. "Son of Atreus, the Achaeans are trying to make you a reproach in the sight of all mortal men, not fulfilling the promise they undertook when they set forth from horse-pasturing Argos, to sail home only after they had sacked strong-walled Iliad. As if they were young children or widowed women, they cry out about going homeward. In truth, it is a hard thing to be grieved with longing for home. Any man who stays away 1 month from his own wife with his ship is impatient, when storm winds and the rising sea hold him back. We have waited here 9 circling years. I cannot find fault with the Achaeans for their impatience beside the curved ships, yet it is disgraceful to wait long and go home empty-handed. Be patient, friends, and stay a little longer until we know whether Calchas' prophecy is true or false." He remembered the great sign at Aulis, the snake, its back blood-mottled, cast down by the Olympian, winding from under the altar toward the plane tree where the sparrows cowered, 8 of them, and the mother the 9th. The snake ate them all, and the mother cried aloud for her young ones, fluttering about him, and he caught her by the wing and coiled around her. After he had devoured the sparrow with her children, the god struck him stone, and Calchas spoke, interpreting the divine portent. "As this snake has eaten the 9 sparrows, so for 9 years we shall fight, and in the 10th we shall take the city of the wide ways." So he spoke then. Now it was being accomplished. The Argives shouted aloud, and the ships echoed to the roaring Achaeans as they cried out in approval of godlike Odysseus. After this Agamemnon sacrificed a fat ox 5 years old to Zeus, swearing that the sun should not go down before he had hurled the castle of Priam blazing and torn the tunic of Hector with bronze. But the son of Cronos accepted the victims and piled up unwished-for hardship. He called upon the muses who have their homes on Olympos. Tell me now, you muses who have your homes on Olympos, for you are goddesses and know all things, while we have heard only rumor and know nothing. Who then of the Achaeans were the chief men and the lords of the Danaans? The catalogue unfolds. Lytos and Peneleos leading the Boeotians in 50 ships, Diomedes of the great war cry, with 80 from Argos and Tiryns, powerful Agamemnon himself, with 100 from Mycenae, and Odysseus of many designs, with 12 from Ithaca. Meanwhile, Achilles lay apart among his curved, sea-wandering vessels, raging at Agamemnon, and his men amused themselves with discs and light spears, while the horses champed their clover. The army moved forward as if all the earth with flame were eaten. Quote, Tell me now, you muses who have your homes on Olympos, for you are goddesses and know all things, while we have heard only rumor and know nothing. Who then of the Achaeans were the chief men and the lords of the Danaans? Quote, As when the west wind moves across the grain deep standing, boisterously, and shakes and sweeps it till the tassels lean, so all of that assembly was shaken, and the men in tumult swept to the ships, and underneath their feet the dust lifted and rose high, and the men were all shouting to one another to lay hold on the ships and drag them down to the bright sea. Book 3. Now when the ranks of both sides were set in order by their leaders, the Trojans came on with clamor and shouting, like wildfowl, as when the clamor of cranes goes high to the heavens, bringing to the Pygmaean men bloodshed and destruction at daybreak. But the Achaean men went silently, breathing valor, stubbornly minded each in his heart to stand by the others. And as these in their advance had come close together, Alexandros the godlike leapt from the ranks of the Trojans, as challenger wearing across his shoulders the hide of a leopard, curved bow and sword, shaking 2 javelins pointed with bronze, and challenged all the best of the Argives to fight man to man against him in bitter combat. Now as soon as Menelaus the warlike caught sight of him, he was glad, like a lion who comes on a mighty carcass, in his hunger chancing upon the body of a horned stag. Thus Menelaus was happy finding godlike Alexandros there in front of his eyes, and thinking to punish the robber, straightway in all his armor he sprang to the ground from his chariot. But Alexandros the godlike, when he saw Menelaus showing among the champions, the heart was shaken within him, and to avoid death he shrank into the host of his own companions, as a man who has come on a snake in a mountain valley suddenly steps back, and the shivers come over his body. So in terror of Atreus' son godlike Alexandros lost himself again in the host of the haughty Trojans. But Hector saw him, and in words of shame rebuked him, calling him evil, beautiful, woman crazy, cajoling. Better had he never been born, or killed unwed. The flowing-haired Achaeans laugh at us, he said, thinking you are our bravest champion only because your looks are handsome, but there is no strength in your heart. The lyre would not help you then, nor the favors of Aphrodite, nor your locks, when you rolled in the dust, nor all your beauty. Alexandros answered that his heart was like an axe blade driven through timber, unshakable, but the gifts of the gods are not to be cast aside, magnificent, which they give of their own will. Still, if Hector wished it, make the Trojans and Achaeans sit down, and set him in the middle with Menelaus to fight alone for the sake of Helen and all her possessions. That one who wins and is proved stronger shall take the woman and lead her homeward, while the rest cut oaths of faith and friendship. So he spoke, and Hector, hearing his word, was happy, and went into the space between and forced back the Trojan battalions. The flowing-haired Achaeans kept pointing their bows at him, until Agamemnon, lord of men, cried out, Argives, hold, cast at him no longer. Hector of a shining helm is trying to tell us something. And Hector spoke to both sides. Hear from me the word of Alexandros, for whose sake this strife has arisen. He would have all the rest of the Trojans and all the Achaeans lay aside their splendid armor, while he himself and Menelaus fight alone for the sake of Helen and all her possessions. That one who wins Let him take the woman and lead her homeward while the rest cut our oaths of faith and friendship. Menelaos of the great war, cry answered. Listen now to me also. This sorrow comes closest to my heart, and I think the Argives and Trojans can go free of each other at last. As for that one of us two to whom death and doom are given, let him die. The rest of you be made friends with each other. So he spoke, and the Trojans and Achaeans were joyful, hoping now to be rid of all the sorrow of warfare. Now Iris came to Helen of the lovely hair, in the likeness of her sister Laodike, the fairest of all Priam's daughters, and called her to the Scaean gates. Straightway Helen covered herself with shining white linen, and went forth from her chamber, weeping, and Athena walked beside her, setting beauty upon her head, and making her taller to see and more full of wonder. Priam called her kindly to sit beside him, and asked the names of the Achaeans she could see, and she told him of Agamemnon, lord of men, and Odysseus, sacker of cities, and Ajax, tall as a tower. Would that I had sat beside some other, in some other land, among my own people. Priam sighed, and called for wine that the Trojans and Achaeans might drink and pour libations and seal their oaths. But the son of Cronos would not accomplish this. The destruction of Troy was already written upon his heart. Now Paris puts on his armor, the fair greaves linked with silver, the corslet of Lycaon his brother, the great shield, the helmet with the horsehair crest, the plumes nodding terribly above. Menelaos' arms in the same way, and they stride into the space between, raging each at the other and shaking their spears' hafts. First Alexandros lets go his spear and strikes the shield of Atreus' son, but the bronze point does not break through. Then Menelaos prays to Zeus, "Grant me to punish the man who first did me injury," and throws, and the spear goes all the way through the glittering shield and smashes through the corslet. Yet Paris bends away and avoids the dark death. Menelaos draws his sword and strikes at the helmet, but the blade breaks 3 times and 4 times, and falls from his grip. "Father Zeus, no god beside is more baleful than you are," he groans, lifting his eyes to the wide sky. Then he rushes in to drag Paris by the helmet strap, and Aphrodite, the shimmering goddess, snaps the strap, and her son Aeneas stands before him with spear and shield, and the armies clash again, and the truce is broken. Aphrodite snatches Paris up in a cloud of mist and sets him down in his own chamber in high-walled Ilion, and sends Helen of the lovely hair to him. Helen finds Paris in the chamber, sitting among the Trojan women, and rebukes him. "You have come back from battle. Would that you had died there, brought down by a better man, a stronger." But Paris answers, "Do not rebuke me with hard words. Not now will Athene give me a second victory over Menelaos. Come, let us go to bed upon the bed of love. Never before has desire so enveloped me, not even when I first stole you from lovely Lake Damon and sailed away upon the sea." Quote, "Evil Paris, beautiful woman crazy, cajoling, better had you never been born or killed unwed." Quote, "Come with me. Alexandros sends for you to come home to him. He is in his chamber now, in the bed with its circled pattern, shining in his raiment and his own beauty. You would not think that he came from fighting against a man. You would think he was going rather to a dance or rested and had been dancing lately." Book 4. Now aloft on Olympos the gods sat in council, conferring across the golden floor as Hebe poured them rounds of nectar. They lifted golden beakers, pledging each other warmly, gazing down upon the city of Troy. But Zeus was set on infuriating Hera, courting her fire with mocking taunts. So, those 2 goddesses there are Menelaos' best defense, Hera of Argos, and Athene who stands by her people. Look at them, sitting apart, watching the dueling. So they take their pleasure. Meanwhile, laughing Aphrodite forever stands by her man and drives the spirits of death away from him. Even now, she has rescued him when he thought he would perish. So, the victory now is with warlike Menelaos. Let us consider, then, how these things shall be accomplished, whether again to stir up grim warfare and the terrible fighting, or cast down love and make them friends with each other. So he mocked, And Athene and Hera muttered, devising evil for the Trojans. Still Athene stayed silent and said nothing, but sulked at Zeus her father, and savage anger took hold of her. But the heart of Hera could not contain her anger, and she burst forth. Majesty, son of Cronos, what sort of thing have you spoken? How can you wish to make wasted and fruitless all this endeavor? The sweat that I have sweated in toil, and my horses worn out gathering my people, and bringing evil to Priam and his children. Do it then, but not all the rest of us gods will approve you. Zeus, who gathers the clouds, answered her, troubled. Dear lady, what can be all the great evils done to you by Priam and the sons of Priam, that you are thus furious forever to bring down the strong-founded city of Iliad? If you could walk through the gates and through the towering ramparts and eat raw Priam and the children of Priam and the other Trojans, then only might you glut at last your anger. Do as you please then, and whenever I in turn am eager to lay waste some city as I please, one in which are dwelling men who are dear to you, you shall not stand in the way of my anger. For of all the cities beneath the sun and the starry heaven, the one I love most is holy Iliad. And Hera the queen, her eyes wide, answered, Excellent. The three cities that I love best of all are Argos and Sparta, Mycenae with streets as broad as Troy's. Raise them, whenever they stir the hatred in your heart. Still, you must not make my labor come to nothing. I am a god too, my descent the same as yours. So come, let us yield to each other now on this one point, I to you and you to me. But quickly, order Athene down to battle now, and see that the Trojans break the sworn truce first and trample on the Argives in their triumph. The father of men and gods complied at once. He winged Athene on. Quickly, down you go to Troy's and Achaea's armies now, and see that the Trojans break the sworn truce first and trample on the Argives in their triumph. So he launched Athene already poised for action. Down the goddess swept from Olympus' craggy peaks and dove like a star the son of Cronos flings, a sign to men at sea or a massive army marching, blazing on with a stream of sparks showering in its wake. Like a shooting star, Athene flashed across the earth, plunging down in the midst of both camp forces. Terror gripped the fighters looking on, stallion-breaking Trojans and Argive men-at-arms. One would glance at a comrade, groaning, What next? Battle again, more pain and grisly fighting, or pacts between both armies. Peace from Zeus, the great steward on high who rules our mortal wars. As Achaeans and Trojans wondered what was coming, Athene merged in the Trojan columns like a fighter, like Antenor's son, the rugged spearman Laodocus, hunting for Pandaros, hoping to find the archer. Find him she did, Lycaon's skilled, fearless son, standing by, flanked by the bands of shielded men who had trooped with him from Izeppo's dark rapids. Athene halted beside him, and let her challenge fly. Here is glory, son of Lycaon. Let me tempt you, you with your archer's skill. Have you the daring to wing an arrow at Menelaus? Just think what thanks, what fame you would win in the eyes of all the Trojans, Prince Paris most of all. Just let him see Menelaus, Atreus' fighting son, brought down by your shaft and hoisted onto his pyre, mourned with grief and tears. Come, up with you, whip an arrow at this invincible Menelaus now. But swear to Apollo, wolf god, glorious archer, you will slaughter splendid victims, newborn lambs when you march home to Zelia's sacred city. So Athene fired the fool's heart inside him. He unstrapped his polished bow. The horn of a wild goat he had shot in the chest one day as the springy ibex clambered down a cliff. The horns on its head ran 16 hands in length, and a bowyer good with goat horn worked them up, fitted, clasped them tight, sanded them smooth, and set the golden notch rings at the tips. Bending it back hard, the archer strung his bow, propping an end against the ground as cohorts braced their shields in a tight wedge to hide him. He flipped the lid of his quiver, plucked an arrow fetched and never shot, a shaft of black pain. Quickly notching the sharp arrow on the string, he swore to Apollo he would slaughter splendid victims. Then, squeezing the nock and string together, drawing the gut back to his nipple, iron head to the hand grip till he flexed the great weapon back in a half-circle curve. The bow sprang, the strings sang out, arrow shot away, razor sharp and raging to whip through Argive ranks. But you, Menelaos, the blessed, deathless gods did not forget you. Zeus's daughter, the queen of fighters first of all. She reared before you, skewed the tearing shaft, flicking it off your skin as quick as a mother flicks a fly from her baby, sleeping softly. Athene's own hand deflected it down the belt where the gold buckles clasp and breastplates overlap. The shaft pierced the tight belt's twisted thongs, piercing the blazoned plates, piercing the guard he wore to shield his loins and block the spears, his best defense. The shaft pierced evenness, the tip of the weapon grazing the man's flesh, and dark blood came spurting from the wound. Picture a woman dying ivory blood red, a Carian or Meonian staining a horse's cheekpiece, stored away in a vault, a king's splendor kept and prized twice over. So now, Menelaos, the fresh blood went staining down your sturdy thighs, your shins and well-turned ankles. The lord of men, Agamemnon, shuddered, frightened to see the dark blood gushing from the wound. And veteran Menelaos cringed himself, but saw the lashing cords and barbs outside the gash, and his courage flooded back inside his chest. Nevertheless, King Agamemnon, groaning heavily, grasped Menelaos' hand and spoke out for the men, as friends around him groaned as well. Dear brother, that truce I sealed in blood was death for you, setting you out alone, exposed before our lines to fight the Trojans. Look how the men of Troy have laid you low, trampling down our solemn, binding truce. But they will never go for nothing, the oaths, the blood of the lambs, the unmixed wine we poured, the firm clasp of the right hand we trusted. Never. Even if Zeus's wrath does not strike home at once, he will strike in his own good time with greater fury. Yes, for in my heart and soul I know this well. The day will come when sacred Troy must die. Priam must die, and all his people with him. Nothing can stop it now. All this will come to pass. But I will suffer terrible grief for you, Menelaos, if you die now, and I go back to parching Argos in disgrace. But the red-haired Menelaos try to calm him. Courage. Do not alarm the men, not for a moment. The point is not lodged in a mortal spot. You see, my glittering war belt stopped the shot in front, my loin piece and the plated guard below it. Then Agamemnon called out in a great voice for the horse-breaking Achaeans to go to war. And the battle rages, and both sides slaughter each other in equal numbers, and the spirits of death pull down the bodies of both, and neither side can break the other's line. The earth runs with the blood of men, and the ground is wet with it, as when a man builds a wall of stone for high orchard, fitting the stones well, keeping out the mighty billows of the sea. So close stood the shields and helms of the fighters, boss shield leaning on boss shield, helmet on helmet, man against man. The horses leaned forward against the chariot poles and fought in the crush of warriors, and the axles groaned, and the ground was wet with blood. Quote, Majesty, son of Cronos, what sort of thing have you spoken? How can you wish to make wasted and fruitless all this endeavor? The sweat that I have sweated in toil, and my horses worn out gathering my people, and bringing evil to Priam and his children. Quote, Here is glory, son of Lycaon. Let me tempt you, you with your archer's skill. Have you the daring to wing an arrow at Menelaos? Quote, Dear brother, that truce I sealed in blood was death for you, setting you out alone, exposed before our lines to fight the Trojans. Book 5. Pallas Athene put strength into the hands and heart of Tydeus' son Diomedes, that he might shine above all the Argives and win the great glory of valor. She set fire blazing from his shield and helmet, tireless fire like the star that rises from the ocean stream at waning summer, beyond all stars, bathed in brilliance. She drove him into the thickest press where men struggled most, and the Trojans scattered before him as wheat stalks snap under the lash of a winter gale. There was a man of the Trojans, dares blameless and bountiful, a priest consecrated to Hephaestos, and he had 2 sons, Phegeus and Idaeus, well skilled in all fighting. These two, breaking from the ranks, charged against him in their chariot as Diomedes came on dismounted. Phegeus let go his spear far shadowing. It passed over the left shoulder of Tydeus' son, nor struck his body, and Diomedes thereafter threw with the bronze, and the weapon flew not vain, but struck the chest between the nipples, and hurled him from behind his horses. And Idaeus, leaping, left the fair-wrought chariot, nor had he the courage to stand over his stricken brother. Even so he could not have escaped the black death spirit. But Hephaestus caught him away and rescued him, shrouded in darkness, that the aged man might not be left altogether desolate. The son of high-hearted Tydeus drove off the horses and gave them to his company to lead back to the hollow vessels. Now as the high-hearted Trojans watched the two sons of Dares, one running away, one cut down beside his chariot, the anger in all of them was stirred. But gray-eyed Athene took violent Ares by the hand and spoke in words, Ares, Ares, manslaughtering, blood-stained, stormer of strong walls, shall we not leave the Trojans and Achaeans to struggle after whatever way Zeus Father grants glory to either, while we two give ground together and avoid Zeus' anger? So she spoke and led violent Ares out of the fighting, and afterward caused him to sit down by the sands of Scamander, while the Danaans bent the Trojans back, and each of the princes killed his man. Then, as Diomedes went storming up the plain like a winter-swollen river in spate that scatters the dikes in its running current, one that the strong compacted dikes can contain no longer, nor do the mounded banks of the blossoming vineyards hold it, rising suddenly as Zeus' rain makes heavy the water. Like these, the massed battalions of the Trojans were scattered by Tydeus' son, and many as they were could not stand against him. But the shining son of Lycaon, Pandaros, watched him storming and strained the bent bow, shot, and hit him in the right shoulder at the hollow of the corslet. The bitter arrow went straight through, holding clean to its way, and the corslet was all blood-spattered. Pandaros cried aloud, Rise up, Trojans, O high-hearted, lashers of horses. Now the best of the Achaeans is hit, and I think he will not long hold up under the strong arrow, if truly Apollo, lord and son of Zeus, stirred me to come forth from Lycia. But the swift arrow had not broken Diomedes. Only he drew back again to his chariot and horses, and stood there speaking to Sthenelus, son of Capaneus. Come, dear friend, step down from the chariot, so that you may pull out from my shoulder this bitter arrow. Sthenelus sprang to the ground, and standing beside him pulled the sharp arrow clean through his shoulder, and the blood shot up spurting through the delicate tunic. Now Diomedes of the great war cry prayed aloud, Hear me now, Atratone, daughter of Zeus of the Aegis. If ever before in kindliness you stood by my father through the terror of fighting, be my friend now also, Athene. Grant me that I may kill this man and come within spear cast, who shot me before I could see him and now boasts over me, saying I cannot live to look much longer on the shining sunlight. Pallas Athene heard him. She made his limbs light again, and his feet, and his hands above them, and standing close beside him, she spoke in winged words. Be of good courage now, Diomedes, to fight with the Trojans, since I have put inside your chest the strength of your father untremulous, such as the horseman Tydeus of the great shield had. I have taken away the mist from your eyes that before now was there, so that you may well recognize the god and the mortal. Therefore now, if a god-making trial of you comes hither, do not do battle head-on with the gods immortal, not with the rest, but only if Aphrodite, Zeus' daughter, comes to the fighting, her at least you may stab with the sharp bronze. She spoke thus, gray-eyed Athene, and went, raging as he had been before to fight with the Trojans. Now the strong rage triple took hold of him, as of a lion whom the shepherd among his fleecy flocks in the wild lands grazed as he leapt the fence of the fold, but has not killed him, only stirred up the lion's strength, and can no more fight him off, but hides in the steading. And the frightened sheep are forsaken, piled pell-mell on each other in heaps, while the lion, raging, still leaps out again over the fence of the deep yard. Such was the rage of strong Diomedes as he closed with the Trojans. He struck Pandaros through the nose next to the eye, the spearhead driving through tongue and teeth. Then he wounded Aeneas with a stone at the cup socket, smashing the hip bone, and Aeneas fell to one knee, a covering of black night coming over both eyes. Aphrodite, his mother, rushed to save him, wrapping her white arms around him, her white robe thrown in a fold before him to shield off the thrown weapons. But Diomedes, knowing her for a god without warcraft, drove the bronze spear through her hand, and the blade tore through the ambrosial robe the Graces themselves had woven for her carefully, over the palm's base. And immortal blood, ichor, that which runs in the veins of the blessed divinities, since these eat no food, nor drink of the shining wine, and therefore have no blood, and are called immortal, flowed from the goddess. And she shrieked and let fall her son. Phoebus Apollo caught him up in a dark mist, for fear some fast-mounted Anon might strike the bronze spear through his chest and strip the life from him. Diomedes of the great war cry called after her, "Give way, daughter of Zeus, from the fighting and the terror. Is it not then enough that you lead astray women without warcraft? Yet, if still you must haunt the fighting, I think that now you will shiver even when you hear some other talking of battles." And the goddess departed in pain, hurt badly. And Iris wind-footed took her by the hand and led her away from the battle, her lovely skin blood-darkened, wounded and suffering. There to the left of the fighting she found Ares the violet, sitting with his spear leaned into the mist and his swift horses. Dropping on one knee before her beloved brother in deep supplication, she asked for his gold-bridled horses. "Beloved brother, rescue me and give me your horses, so I may come to Olympos, where is the place of the immortals. I am in too much pain from the wound of a mortal spear-stroke, Tydeus' sons, who would fight now even against Zeus' father." Ares gave her the gold-bridled horses, and Iris climbed beside her, seized the reins, whipped the team to a run, and on the horses flew, holding nothing back. In a moment they reached the immortal stronghold, steep Olympus. The deathless Aphrodite sank in the lap of Dione her mother, who held her and stroked her and spoke. "Who has done this to you, dear child? What god has harmed you?" And Aphrodite sobbed in answer, "Diomedes, the son of Tydeus, stabbed me through the wrist, that madman who would fight even Father Zeus." And Dione told her the wounds that other gods had suffered at mortal hands, how Ares had been bound in a bronze cauldron by the sons of Olyus for 13 months, and how even Hades had been wounded by the arrow of Heracles. Meanwhile, gray-eyed Athene watched from above and mocked, and Hera joined her taunts, and Zeus smiled and called Aphrodite to him. "Fighting is not for you, my child. Leave the work of war to Athena and Ares. Yours are the works of marriage and desire." And gray-eyed Athene returned from the battle to Diomedes, and he told her, "I will not fight against Ares, who leads the Trojans. I know when a god is among the enemy." But Athene spoke sharply, "Do not fear Ares or any other god. I will drive him from the field for you." She climbed into the chariot and seized the reins, and Sthenelus was lifted aside, and the goddess drove straight at Ares. She donned the helm of Aides, the dark cap of the god of the dead, so that not even Ares could see her. He was stripping the armor from a fallen man when he saw Diomedes, and he rushed at him with his spear. But Athene caught the spear in her hand and turned it aside, and Diomedes drove his own spear into Ares beneath the belt where the war corset left him unprotected. The blade tore through the ambrosial robe, and the god of war bellowed with a sound as great as 9,000 men make, or 10,000, when they cry as they carry into the fighting the fury of the war god. And a shivering seized hold alike on Achaeans and Trojans in their fear at the bellowing of battle-insatiate Ares. The god of war fled then, black as a thunderstorm, and soared to steep Olympos. He sat down beside Cronian Zeus and showed the immortal blood dripping from the wound. "Father Zeus, are you not angered at what I have suffered? We everlasting gods must endure such blows at each other's hands whenever we show favor to mortal men." It was Athena drove him on, this reckless Diomedes, to wound Aphrodite, and now he charges even me with his spear. Zeus looked at him and spoke, "Do not come whining to me, you two-faced god. Of all the immortals on Olympus, you are the one I hate the most. You love strife and battle and bloodshed. You have your mother's temper, which even I can barely control. But since you are my son, the healer shall tend your wound. And Hephaestus applied the drugs and healed the war god. And Hebe washed him and dressed him in fresh robes, and he sat down at the side of Zeus, restored to glory. Then Hera and gray-eyed Athene returned from the battle, having stopped the murderous work of Ares among the Achaeans. Aristia, the single warrior's moment of supreme excellence on the battlefield, granted by divine favor and mortal courage, when one man becomes the axis upon which the battle turns. Diomedes' Aristia is the most complete in the Iliad, surpassing even Hector's in its scope and divine authorization. Diomedes, son of Tydeus, king of Argos, the warrior whom Athene chooses as her champion in Book 5, a man who wounds gods themselves, yet remains mortal, whose wife Aegilia will one day mourn him, whose destiny is short and bright. Quote, with a sound as great as 9,000 men make, or 10,000, when they cry as they carry into the fighting the fury of the war god. And a shivering seas hold alike on Achaeans and Trojans in their fear at the bellowing of battle-insatiate Ares. Quote, Ares, Ares, manslaughtering, blood-stained, stormer of strong walls, shall we not leave the Trojans and Achaeans to struggle between themselves, and let Zeus give the glory to whichever he will? Quote, give way, daughter of Zeus, from the fighting and the terror. It is not then enough that you lead astray women without warcraft? Yet, if still you must haunt the fighting, I think that now you will shiver even when you hear some other talking of battles. Book 6. So the grim encounter of Achaeans and Trojans was left to itself, and the battle veered greatly now one way, now another, over the plain as they guided their bronze spears at each other in the space between the waters of Xanthos and Samois. First Telamonian Ajax, that bastion of the Achaeans, broke the Trojan battalions, striking down Acamas the huge and mighty, the son of Eusoros. Throwing first, he struck the horn of the horse-haired helmet, and the bronze spear point drove inward through the bone, and a mist of darkness clouded both eyes. Diomedes cut down Axelos, a man rich in substance and a friend to all humanity, since in his house by the wayside he entertained all comers. Yet there was none of these now to stand before him, and Diomedes stripped life from both Axelos and his henchman Calesios, so down to the underworld went both men. Now Menelaus captured Adrestos alive, for his horses bolting over the level land got entangled in a tamarisk growth and shattered the curving chariot. Adrestos was whirled headlong into the dust on his face, and Menelaus stood over him with a far-shadowed spear. But Adrestos, catching him by the knees, supplicated, "Take me alive, son of Atreus, and take appropriate ransom. In my rich father's house the treasures lie piled in abundance." So he spoke, and moved the spirit inside Menelaus. But Agamemnon came on the run. "Dear brother, are you concerned so tenderly with these people? Did you and your house get the best of treatment from the Trojans? No, let not one of them go free of sudden death." And Menelaus shoved Adrestos back, and Agamemnon stabbed him in the side and wrenched out the ash spear. Then Helenos, best by far of the augurs, spoke to Hector. "Go back to the city and tell your mother to assemble the ladies of honor at the temple of gray-eyed Athene. Let her lay the largest and loveliest robe along the knees of the goddess and promise 12 heifers, yearlings never broken, if only she will have pity on Troy and hold back from sacred Ilion the son of Tydeus, that wild spear fighter. For never did we so fear Achilles even. This man has gone clean berserk, so that no one can match his warcraft against him." Hector did not disobey, but at once leapt to the ground from his chariot and ranged over the whole host, stirring them up to fight. Now Glaucus and Diomedes met in the space between the two armies. Diomedes asked, "Who are you, good friend? I have not seen you before in the fighting where men win glory." Glaucus answered, "Why ask of my generation? As is the generation of leaves, so is that of humanity. The wind scatters the leaves on the ground, but the live timber burgeons with leaves again in the season of spring returning. So one generation of men will grow while another dies. And he spoke of Bellerophonte and the Chimera and the long chain of his lineage. Diomedes' spirits lifted, for they discovered they were guest friends from the time of their grandfathers. Zeus himself stole away the wits of Glaucus, who exchanged his golden armor for the bronze of Diomedes, 9 oxen's worth for 100. But Hector went to the house of Alexandros and found the man busy with his armor, while Helen sat among her attendant women. In words of shame, Hector rebuked him. The people are dying around the city and around the steep wall as they fight hard, and it is for you that this war with its clamor has flared up about our city. Alexandros answered softly, My wife was winning me over and urging me into the fight, and that way seems to me also the better one. But Helen spoke to Hector, How I wish that on that day, when my mother first bore me, the foul whirlwind had caught me away and swept me into the sea before all these things had happened. Yet since the gods brought it about, I wish I had been the wife of a better man. But come, rest on this chair, my brother, for it is on your heart beyond all that the hard work has fallen for the sake of dishonored me. Hector answered, Already my heart within is hastening me to defend the Trojans. For I am going first to my own house, to visit my beloved wife and my son, who is little, since I do not know if ever again I shall come back this way, or whether the gods will strike me down at the hands of the Achaeans. So speaking, Hector departed and made his way to his own dwelling, but failed to find Andromache of the white arms, for she, with the child and a fair-robed attendant, had taken her place on the tower in lamentation. When he saw no sign of his wife, he spoke among the handmaidens, Where has Andromache gone? The housekeeper answered, She has gone to the great tower of Iliad, for she heard the Trojans were hard pressed. So he hurried to the Scaean gates, and there his warm, generous wife came running up to meet him, Andromache the daughter of gallant-hearted Aetion, following in her steps a servant holding the boy against her breast, in the first flush of life. Only a baby, Hector's son, the darling of his eyes and radiant as a star. Hector would always call the boy Scamandrius. Townsmen called him Astyanax, lord of the city, since Hector was the lone defense of Troy. The great man of war breaking into a broad smile, his gaze fixed on his son in silence. Andromache clung to his hand and wept freely. Reckless one, my Hector, your own fiery courage will destroy you. Have you no pity for him, our helpless son? Or me, and the destiny that weighs me down, your widow, now so soon? I have lost my father. Mother's gone as well. Father, the brilliant Achilles laid him low when he stormed Thebe with her towering gates. And the 7 brothers I had within our halls, all in the same day, went down to the house of death. You, Hector, you're my father now, my noble mother a brother too, and you're my husband, young and warm and strong. Pity me, please. And tall Hector nodded, his helmet flashing. All this weighs on my mind too, dear woman. But I would die of shame to face the men of Troy if I would shrink from battle now, a coward. I've learned it all too well, to stand up bravely, always to fight in the front ranks. For my heart and soul, I also know this well. The day will come when sacred Troy must die. Priam must die, and all his people with him. Even so, it is less the pain of the Trojans that weighs me down, as it is of you, when some bronze-armored Achaean leads you away in tears, and your day of freedom is done. He spoke, and stretched his arms toward his son. The boy, shrieking with terror, pressed back against his nurse's breast, afraid of the horsehair helmet and the crest upon it, nodding terribly. The man and woman laughed through their tears, and glorious Hector lifted the helmet from his head and set it on the ground, and kissed his dear son and dandled him in his arms, praying, Zeus, all you immortals, grant this boy may be as I am, first among the Trojans, strong and valiant, and may one day say of him, He is a better man than his father. He spoke, and laid his son back in his wife's arms. She took him to her breast, smiling through her tears. Hector pitied her, stroked her with his hand. Strange woman, surely I too have pity. Yet I would not go to the house of Hades before I have driven the battle cry against the Trojans, since there is no other who will bring honor to sacred Ilion, no one better after I am gone. Xenia, guest friendship, the sacred bond between host and guest that transcends the war. Glaucus and Diomedes discover their grandfathers were guest friends and exchange armor in a moment of civilized grace amid the slaughter, Zeus himself stealing away the wits of Glaucus to make the exchange happen. Andromache's lament. The farewell at the Scaean gates is the Iliad's most intimate scene of domestic tenderness. Andromache enumerates her dead father, mother, and 7 brothers, all killed by Achilles, and calls Hector her father, mother, brother, and husband. Hector knows Troy will fall, but cannot look away from the duty that will kill him. Quote, "As is the generation of leaves, so is that of humanity. The wind scatters the leaves on the ground, but the live timber burgeons with leaves again in the season of spring returning. So one generation of men will grow while another dies." Quote, "You, Hector, you are my father now, my noble mother a brother too, and you are my husband, young and warm and strong. Pity me, please." Quote, "I would not go to the house of Hades before I have driven the battle cry against the Trojans, since there is no other who will bring honor to sacred Ilion, no one better after I am gone." Book 7. So speaking, Hector the glorious swept on through the gates, and with him Alexandros his brother, both of them minded in their hearts to do battle and take their part in the fighting. And as to men of the sea, in their supplication the god sends a fair wind, when they are breaking their strength at the smoothed oar sweeps, driving over the sea, and their arms are weak with weariness. So these two appeared to the Trojans, who had longed for them. Each killed his man. Now as gray-eyed Athene was aware of these two destroying the men of Argos, she went down from the peaks of Olympus to sacred Ilion, where Apollo stirred forth to meet her from his seat on Pergamos. These two encounter each other beside the oak tree, and Apollo spoke. "For this day let us put an end to the hatred and the fighting now. They shall fight again hereafter, till we witness the finish they make of Ilion." Athene, "Thus let it be." Apollo, "Let us rouse up the strong heart in Hector, if he might call forth some Danaan to fight him single man against single man." Helenos gathered into his heart their deliberation and went to Hector. "Make the Trojans sit down, and all the Achaeans, and call forth their bravest to fight you in bitter combat, since it is not your destiny yet to die and encounter fate." Hector, hearing his word, was happy, as when the shudder of the west wind suddenly rising scatters across the water, so darkening were settled the ranks of Achaeans and Trojans in the plain. Hector spoke, "Let one of you stand forth to fight me alone. If I fall, let him take my armor. If I win, I will carry his to sacred Ilion. And some day one of the men to come will say, 'This is the mound of the man who died long ago, and glorious Hector killed him.'" All stayed stricken to silence. But Menelaus stood forth. "Ah me, you brave in words, you women, not men, of Achaia, I myself will arm against this man." He began to put on his splendid armor, but Agamemnon caught him by the right hand. "Menelaus, you are mad. Even Achilles trembles to meet Hector, and he is far better than you are." Nestor stood forth. "If only I were young now, as when I fought Ereuthalion, a man godlike, wearing the armor of Lord Areithous. None had the courage to fight him, only I, and Pallas Athene gave me the glory. If only I were young now, Hector would soon find his battle. But you, the bravest of all the Achaeans, are not minded to go against him." So the old man scolded them, and 9 in all stood forth. The lot of Ajax leapt from the helmet. They prayed to Zeus, and Ajax armed him in shining bronze. He strode on his way. As Ares the war god walks gigantic, the wall of the Achaeans, smiling under his threatening brows, and shaking the spear far shadowing. Ajax came near. "Hector, you will learn now what the bravest men are like among the Danaans, even after Achilles." Tall Hector answered, "Do not test me as if I were some ineffectual boy. I know well how to fight and kill men in battle. Yet great as you are, I would not strike you by stealth, but openly." Hector threw his spear, and it shore through 6 folds of Aia's shield, but was stopped in the 7th ox hide. Ajax cast in return, and the spearhead passed clean through Hector's shield and corslet, yet he bent away and avoided the dark death. Both went at each other like lions who live on raw meat, or wild boars whose strength is no light thing. Hector stabbed into the shield's center, but the spearhead bent back. Ajax plunged upon him, pounding Hector back in his fury, and tore at his neck so that the dark blood broke. Hector caught up a stone, black and rugged and huge, and struck the terrible shield of Ajax so that the bronze clashed loud. Ajax in turn lifted a stone far greater, and the shield broke inward like a millstone, and Hector's very knees gave, but Apollo lifted him upright. And now they would have been stabbing with their swords at close quarters, had not the heralds come up, holding their staves between the two men. Ideo spoke, "Stop the fight. To Zeus both of you are beloved. Night darkens now. It is good to give way to the night time." Hector answered, "Let us give over this fighting for today. Come then, let us give each other glorious presents, so that any may say, 'These two fought in heart-consuming hate, then joined in close friendship before they were parted.'" So he spoke, and gave a sword with nails of silver, and Ajax gave a war belt colored shining with purple. So separating, Ajax went among the Achaean people, and Hector went back to the thronging Trojans, who were made happy when they saw him coming alive and unwounded. They feasted, and the aged Nestor wove his counsel. "With the dawn we should set a pause to the fighting, and we'll back the bodies with mules and oxen. Let us build towered ramparts to be a defense of ourselves and our vessels, with gates strongly fitted, and on the outer side a deep ditch." So he spoke, and all the kings gave him their approval. The duel of Ajax and Hector. Hector strikes first, his spear piercing 6 folds of a shield, but stopped in the 7th. Ajax hurls in return, the spearhead passing clean through Hector's shield and corslet. They fight like lions who live on raw meat. Hector lifts a stone. Ajax lifts a greater that breaks the shield like a millstone and brings Hector to his knees, but Apollo lifts him upright. They exchange gifts, a sword of silver nails for a war belt colored shining with purple, and part as friends before they are parted. Quote, "Come then, let us give each other glorious presents, so that any of the Achaeans or Trojans may say of us, 'These two fought each other in heart-consuming hate, then joined with each other in close friendship before they were parted.'" Book 8. Now at dawn the yellow-robed scattered over all the earth. Zeus, who joys in the thunder, made an assembly of all the immortals upon the highest peak of rugged Olympos, and spoke, "Hear me, all you gods and all you goddesses. Let no female divinity, nor male god either, presume to cut across the way of my word, but consent to all of you, so that I can make an end in speed of these matters. And anyone I perceive against the gods while attempting to go among the Trojans and help them, or among the Danaans, he shall go whipped against his dignity back to Olympos, or I shall take him and dash him down to the murk of Tartaros, far below, where the uttermost depth of the pit lies under earth, where there are gates of iron and a brazen doorstone, as far beneath the house of Hades as from earth the sky lies. Then he will see how far I am strongest of all the immortals. Come, you gods, make this endeavor, that you all may learn this. Let down out of the sky a cord of gold. Lay hold of it, all you who are gods, and all who are goddesses. Yet not even so can you drag down Zeus from the sky to the ground. Not Zeus, the high lord of counsel, though you try until you grow weary. Yet whenever I might strongly be minded to pull you, I could drag you up, earth and sea and all with you. Then fetch the golden rope about the horn of Olympos, and make it fast, so that all once more should dangle in mid-air. So much stronger am I than the gods, and stronger than mortals. All of them stayed, stricken to silence, stunned at his word. But gray-eyed Athene answered, "Son of Cronos, our father, we know already your strength, and how none can stand up against it. Yet even so we are sorrowful for the Danaan spearmen, who must fill out an unhappy destiny, and perish. Still we shall keep out of the fighting, as you command us. Yet we will put good counsel in the Argives, so that not all of them will die because of your anger." Zeus smiled at her. "Tritogenia, Dear daughter, do not lose heart, for I say this not in outright anger, and my meaning toward you is kindly. He harnessed his bronze-shod horses with manes streaming of gold and climbed into his chariot, and they winged their way unreluctant through the space between the earth and the starry heaven. He came to Ida with all her springs, to Gargerin, where was his holy ground and his smoking altar, and sat down on a mountain looking out over the city of Troy and the ships of the Achaeans. The flowing-haired Achaeans put on their armor. In the city the Trojans took up theirs, fewer men, yet minded to stand the encounter, caught in necessity for their wives and their children. As these advancing came to one place, they dashed their shields together and their spears, and the sound grew huge of the fighting. So long as it was early morning and the sacred daylight increasing, so long the thrown weapons of both took hold and men dropped under them. But when the sun god stood bestriding the middle heaven, then the Father balanced his golden scales, and in them he set two fateful portions of death for Trojans, breakers of horses, and bronze-armored Achaeans. The Achaeans' death day was heaviest. There the fates of the Achaeans settled down toward the bountiful earth, while those of the Trojans were lifted into the wide sky. And he crashed a great stroke from Ida, and a kindling flash shot over the people of the Achaeans, and pale terror took hold of all of them. Then Hymenaeus dared not stand his ground, nor Agamemnon, nor did the two Iandes stand. Only Gerenian Nestor stayed, his horse failing, struck by an arrow from Alexandros, struck at the point of the head where the utmost hairs of horses are grown along the skull, and which is a place most mortal. The fast-running horses of Hector came through the flux of the fighting, carrying their daring driver. Diomedes cried out to Odysseus, "Where are you running, turning your back in battle like a coward? Stay, so that we can beat back this fierce man from the ancient." But Odysseus gave no attention and swept by on his way to the hollow ships. Diomedes, alone as he was, went among the champions and stood before the horses of the old man, and spoke, "Old sir, in very truth these young fighters are too much for you. Come then, climb into my chariot, so that you may see what the Trojan horses are like, how they understand their plain, and how to traverse it in rapid pursuit and withdrawal. Horses I took away from Aeneas, who strikes men to terror. Now there would have been fighting beyond control and destruction, had not the Father of gods and of men sharply perceived them. He thundered horribly and dashed the shimmering lightning to the ground in front of the horses of Diomedes, and a ghastly blaze of flaming sulfur shot up, and the horses cringed away against the chariot. Nestor called out, "Son of Tydeus, steer now to flight your single-foot horses. Can you not see that the power of Zeus no longer is with you? For the time Zeus, son of Cronos, gives glory to this man. Hereafter, if he will give it to us also. No man can beat back the purpose of Zeus, not even one very strong, since Zeus is by far the greater." Diomedes answered, "Yes, old sir, all this you have said is fair and orderly. But this thought comes as a bitter sorrow to my heart and my spirit. For some day Hector will say openly before the Trojans, 'The son of Tydeus, running before me, fled to his vessels.' So he will vaunt, and then let the wide earth open beneath me." The ditch of the wall was filled with armored men and horses penned there, and he who penned them was Hector, Priam's son, since Zeus was giving him glory. He might have kindled the balanced ships with hot flame, had not the lady Hera set it in Agamemnon's heart to rush in with speed himself and stir the Achaeans. He stood beside the black, huge, hollowed ship of Odysseus and lifted his voice in a piercing cry. "Shame, you Argives, poor nonentities splendid to look on. Where are high words gone? Father Zeus, is it one of our two strong kings you have stricken in this disaster now? Still, Zeus, bring to pass at least this thing that I pray for. Let our men at least get clear and escape." He wept, and the Father took pity upon him and bent his head. Straightway he sent down the most lordly of birds, an eagle, with a fawn caught in his talons, who cast it down beside Zeus' splendid altar. They, when they saw the bird and knew it was Zeus who sent it, remembered once again their warcraft and turned on the Trojans. Teucros the blameless bent his curved bow and struck down Trojans in close succession. Orsilochos, Ormenos, Ophelestes, Ditor, Chromios, Lycophonts, Amopon, Melanippos, but still could not hit Hector. He let fly another shaft straight for Hector, and all his heart was straining to hit him, yet missed his man once again as Apollo faltered his arrow. And in his fury Hector struck Teucros with a great jagged boulder, smashing the sinew at his wrist, and Ajax stood bestriding him under the great shield. The Trojans piled the Achaeans straight backward against the deep ditch. Now Hera took pity and spoke to Athene. No longer shall we care for the Danaans in their uttermost hour of destruction. Athene answered that it was Zeus who was furious, hard and forever wicked, bent to the wishes of Thetis, who kissed his knees and entreated that he give honor to Achilles. The goddesses harnessed their golden bridled team and drove forth. But Zeus, watching from Ida, was angered terribly and stirred Iris to turn them back. I will lame beneath the harness their fast-running horses, and hurl the gods from the driver's place, and smash their chariot, and not in the circle of 10 returning years shall they be whole. Hera yielded, and turned back the single-foot horses. The goddesses took their place on the golden couches among the other immortals, their hearts deep grieving within them. Zeus, his heart still wrathful, spoke, Surely in the battle where men win glory you are not wearied out, destroying those Trojans on whom you have set your grim wrath. In the whole account, such is my strength and my hand so invincible. Not all the gods who are on Olympos could turn me backward, but before this the trembling took hold of your shining bodies, before you could look upon the fighting and war's work of sorrow. The declaration of Zeus. At dawn Zeus gathers all the immortals upon the highest peak of Olympos and speaks with absolute authority. No god may help either side. He threatens Tartaros. Far below, where the uttermost depth of the pit lies under earth, where there are gates of iron and a brazen doorstone, as far beneath the house of Hades as from earth the sky lies. He challenges them to try to drag him down with a golden cord. Not even so could they move him, yet he could drag them all up, earth and sea and all, and make them dangle in mid-air. The speech is the foundation upon which all the suffering of the war rests. Athene answers for the immortals. They will keep out of the fighting as commanded, yet will put good counsel in the Argives, so that not all of them will die. Zeus smiles at his daughter and calls her Tritogenia, and the word is kind. Quote, Let down out of the sky a cord of gold. Lay hold of it, all you who are gods and all who are goddesses. Yet not even so can you drag down Zeus from the sky to the ground. Not Zeus, the high lord of counsel, though you try until you grow weary. Yet whenever I might strongly be minded to pull you, I could drag you up, earth and sea and all with you. Quote, Surely in the battle where men win glory you are not wearied out, destroying those Trojans on whom you have set your grim wrath. In the whole account, such is my strength and my hand so invincible. Not all the gods who are on Olympos could turn me backward, but before this the trembling took hold of your shining bodies, before you could look upon the fighting and war's work of sorrow. Book 9. Dread and darkness lay upon the Achaean host, while the Trojans kept their watchfires burning bright across the plain, their flutes and pipes sounding through the night. Agamemnon, the lord of many peoples, wandered sleepless, torn between the ruin that had come and the ruin still to come, his spirit churning like a storm-tossed sea when the north wind and the west descend together and tear the salt water into foam. He gathered the captains and wept before them, his tears falling like water that drips from a high and broken cliff. He told them of Zeus's betrayal, the promise made and now withdrawn, and urged them to board the long ships and sail for the fields of Argos, for Troy would never fall. Silence answered him. Then Diomedes of the war cry rose, and spoke with the hardness of a man who has bled and killed for nothing. He told the king that he had been first to question his courage, that the gifts of Zeus are given by halves, honor to some, strength to others, but the heart of battle he would not surrender. He challenged all the host. Let those who would flee go home, but he and Sthenelus would stay until the walls were dust. The army roared their approval. Nestor the old horseman praised the younger man's fire, but urged the prudence of age. The night must be watched, the sentries placed, the princes feasted. And then, he said, perhaps they might still find words or gifts that could turn Achilles back from his wrath. In the morning the embassy set forth, Odysseus the many-cunning, Phoenix the aged teacher, and Ajax of the broad shield, bearing tripods and gold and horses and women, a king's ransom for a single man's return. They prayed to the earth-shaker as they walked the shore, that he might soften the heart of the son of Peleus. They found him in his tent with a lyre in his hands, the silver-stringed instrument he had taken from the sacked city of Aetion, and he was singing the deeds of men who had already died. Patroclus sat across from him in silence, watching and waiting. When Achilles saw them, he rose and set the lyre aside, and he greeted them with the warmth of a man who knows that even in his rage there are those he still loves above all others. They feasted. Odysseus spoke, listing the gifts, describing the fires that ringed the ships, pleading with the son of Peleus to remember his father's words. Phoenix wept and told the tale of Meleagros, who in his fury withdrew from the fighting while the flames crept closer, until at last he rose and saved what remained. Ajax spoke last, bluntly, appealing not to glory or to wealth, but to the simple bond between men who eat and sleep and fight under the same roof. And Achilles answered them all. He said he despised the man who says one thing and hides another, and he would not be moved. The son of Atreus had taken what was his and given nothing back. He had stormed 12 cities by sea and 11 by land, and every spoil had gone to Agamemnon, who sat behind the lines and counted them. Why should he fight for men who gave no thanks? The bird feeds her young but starves herself. Such was his life among the Danaans, all labor and no gain. His mother Thetis had told him of the two paths. If he stayed and fought beside Troy, his name would never die, but he would never see his homeland again. If he sailed home, the glory would be gone, but a long and quiet life awaited him. He told them to sail home, all of them, and to find some other plan, for his would not change. The embassy and its failure. 3 envoys go to Achilles bearing the richest gifts the Achaean kings can offer: gold, bronze, horses, women, and the return of Briseis untouched. Phoenix tells the story of Meleagros, who like Achilles withdrew from battle in wrath and nearly lost everything before returning too late. Ajax appeals to friendship, the simplest and most human argument of all. Achilles refuses them all. He will not be bought. He will not be shamed. He will not be moved. The two paths. The goddess Thetis, his mother, revealed to him the double shadow of his fate. Stay and win undying renown, but die young before the walls of Troy, or sail home and live a long life in obscurity. He chooses neither actively. He simply refuses to return to the fighting. The choice hangs suspended, a man standing between two kinds of death. But Achilles was not finished. He spoke of the spoils he had won, 12 cities by sea, 11 more across the plain of Troy, and how every treasure had been carried back to the son of Atreus, who waited safe behind the ships and parceled out the gains while keeping the lion's share for himself. From the rest the kings received their portions, and they held them still, but from him alone among all the Achaeans, Agamemnon had seized the woman he loved and kept her. Let him enjoy her now. Why should they fight at all? Was it only for Helen, that woman with the loose hair, that the sons of Atreus had mustered this great host and brought them across the water? Other men loved their wives as deeply as he had loved Briseis, though he had won her with his spear. But now his honor had been stripped from his hands, and the man who had robbed him would never win him back. Phoenix wept and spoke of the old days, how Peleus had sent the boy to him, barely more than a child, not yet knowing the ways of war or the art of words in assembly. He had raised Achilles as his own, taught him to speak and to fight, and he could not bear to be left behind now, not even if the gods themselves promised to restore his youth. He told the tale of Meleagros, the man who sat in his chamber while the flames crept toward his city walls, who relented only when all seemed lost, and who received then only a fraction of what he might have had if he had risen sooner. The lesson hung in the air like smoke. Anger has its hour, but the hour passes, and what remains is what you did when it passed. Ajax the Telamonian spoke last, and he spoke simply. "Enough," he said. Achilles had made his fury a wall around himself, and no argument would bring it down. But friendship still had a claim, the bond of men who shared bread and salt under the same roof. He asked only that they go, and he begged Achilles to consider what even his own house required of him. The answer was the same. Achilles would not return. He told them of the two destinies his mother, the silver-footed goddess, had laid before him. If he stayed before Troy, his name would live forever, but his life would be short. If he sailed home to Phthia, the glory would wither, but the years would be long. He told them to go back to the lords of the Argives and find another plan, for his would not change. And he said they could take Phoenix with them if the old man wished, but he would not hold anyone by force. The envoys sat in silence, stunned by the hardness of his words, until Ajax rose and said they should go. What could avail against a man whose heart had turned to iron? Quote, "For as I detest the doorways of death, I detest that man who hides one thing in the depths of his heart and speaks forth another." Quote, "Fate is the same for the man who holds back, the same if he fights hard. We are all held in a single honor, the brave with the weaklings. A man dies still if he has done nothing, as one who has done much." Book 10. Night lay over the ships and the plain alike, but the sleep of the Danaans was shallow and fitful, haunted by the glow of Trojan fires that burned in a great ring around the city. Agamemnon, the lord of many peoples, wandered between his shelter and the water's edge, his mind a storm that would not break. He gazed at the enemy campfires blazing against the walls of Iliad, heard the shrill of pipes and the low murmur of men, and then turned back toward his own dark ships and toward his hair in anguish. Menelaus, too, was wakeless with worry, the thought of what these men had suffered for his sake gnawing at him through the hours. He armed himself and went to find his brother, and together they went to Nestor. The old man of Pylos was already awake. Odysseus, the many cunning, had come upon them in the darkness, and when Nestor told him of his fear that the Trojans might move against the ships before dawn, he turned back into his shelter and took up his shield and joined them. They went to Diomedes, who slept with his gear laid out beside him, his spear standing upright in the ground, the bronze glinting even in the dark like a star. Nestor woke him with a nudge and a sharp word, and the son of Tydeus rose and said he was ready. Nestor proposed what he had been thinking. Might there be one man among them brave enough to slip into the Trojan lines and learn whether they meant to hold their ground or retreat to the city? The one who brought back word would earn great honor and a gift from every lord who commanded ships. Diomedes spoke at once. The task stirred his blood, but he said two were better than one. When two worked together, one could watch while the other struck, and the reach of a single man alone was short. Many volunteered to go, but Agamemnon chose Odysseus, whose cunning was beyond all others. The two of them set out into the night, and as they walked the shore they prayed to the gray-eyed goddess, daughter of Zeus, that she would guide them and bring them back safe. She heard them and sent a heron close along their path, a bird of the night, and though they could not see it, they heard its cry and took it for a sign of favor. On the other side of the plain, Hector too had gathered his captains and called for a volunteer to spy upon the Achaean ships. Dolon, the son of the herald Diomedes, stepped forward, a man swift of foot and rich in bronze and gold, but ill-favored to look upon, and the only son among 5 sisters. Hector swore by his scepter that he would give Dolon the chariot and horses of Achilles if he brought back word. Dolon went out alone into the darkness, wrapped in a wolfskin cloak and carrying a bow, heading toward the enemy fleet. But he was never to return with news for Hector, for Odysseus and Diomedes saw him coming. They lay among the corpses of the battlefield and let him pass, then rose and gave chase. When Dolon heard their footsteps behind him, he turned and ran, but Diomedes threw his spear, and it struck the earth beside his shoulder. The man stopped, terrified, his teeth chattering in his mouth, and when they seized him he offered ransom, gold and bronze, anything they wished. But Odysseus smiled and told him to answer truthfully. Where was Hector? Where were the guards? How were the Trojans arranged? Dolon told them everything. That Hector was with the elders by the barrow of Ilos, that the Trojans had no proper watch, that the Thracians had arrived that very day under Rhesus, king of their people, and lay sleeping in a camp beyond the main body. When Odysseus had heard enough, Diomedes killed the man and left him on the ground for the dogs and birds. They went on to the Thracian camp and found the soldiers sleeping in rows, their armor laid out beside them in good order. Rhesus slept in the center with his horses tethered at the chariot rail. Diomedes began the slaughter. He moved through the camp like a lion among unguarded cattle, cutting down man after man, and Odysseus dragged each body out of the path of the horses, which were not yet used to stepping over the dead. When 12 had fallen, Diomedes came to Rhesus himself, the 13th, and took his life as he lay in a sleep from which no dream would wake him. It was no dream that stood beside his head, but the son of Tydeus by the will of Athene. Odysseus untied the horses and drove them from the camp. Diomedes mounted behind him, and they rowed hard for the ships. But Apollo watched from above and saw Athene attending the son of Tydeus. And in anger he roused Hippocoon, cousin of Rhesus, who saw the empty ground and the slaughter and raised a great cry. A clamor rose from the Trojans as they gathered and stared at the carnage. But by then the two heroes were already far across the plain, and Nestor heard the thunder of the horses' hooves and called out to welcome them home. The night raid. Two separate missions unfold in the dark. The Achaean scouts slip out to gather intelligence, while Dolon creeps toward the Achaean ships on the same errand. Odysseus and Diomedes intercept Dolon, extract the information they need, and kill him. Then they push deeper into the night, into the camp of the Thracians under Rhesus, and slaughter 13 sleeping men before stealing the horses and riding back to the ships. It is a night of blood and silence, of men killed in their sleep, and of a single pair of heroes moving through the dark like shadows. The mirror of the night. Hector and Agamemnon both send scouts into the darkness, each driven by the same fear, that the other side might move before dawn. Dolon and Diomedes are mirror images, both volunteers, both seeking glory, but one dies in the dark and the other returns triumphant. This is the darkest raid in the Iliad, a descent into the underworld of the night where men are killed without waking and horses are stolen from beside their dead masters. Quote, Hector, my own heart and my proud spirit arouse me to go close to the swift-running ships and to learn about them. Quote, as a lion advancing on the helpless herds unshepherded of sheep or goats pounces upon them with wicked intention, so the son of Tydeus attacked the Thracian people until he had killed 12. Book 11. Dawn rose from her bed beside Tithonus and carried her light across the world, and Zeus sent strife down to the Achaean ships, the goddess who delights in war, holding in her hands the portent of battle. She took her position on the black ship of Odysseus, moored in the center so her cry could reach both flanks, from the shelter of Ajax to the shelter of Achilles, and she screamed out with a voice that put fighting spirit into every Danaan heart. Battle was suddenly sweeter to them than the voyage home. The son of Atreus armed himself in a blaze of bronze. His corslet was a wonder, 10 bands of cobalt, 12 of gold, 20 of tin, with serpents wrought at the throat like rainbows across a cloud. The shield on his arm bore the face of the Gorgon, and fear and rout strode beside her on the silver belt. He took up his spear, and Hera and Athene sent thunder rolling about him to honor the lord of deep golden Mycenae. The two armies met like reapers cutting their way toward each other across a field of wheat. Agamemnon drove into the heart of the Trojans and killed Iphidamas, the young son of Antenor, who had left his bride chamber and come to Troy with 12 ships. The young man's spear glanced off the king's belt, and Agamemnon seized the shaft and drove his sword into the boy's neck. His brother Kun came at Agamemnon from the blind side and wounded him beneath the elbow, but the king killed him too and hewed his head off over his brother's body. The two sons of Antenor fell together, and their doom was complete. But even as the blood ran warm, the pain of the wound struck Agamemnon like the labor pangs that seize a woman in childbearing. He climbed back into his chariot and called to his driver, crying out to the Danaans that Zeus would not let him fight all day. And when Hector saw the king retreating, He raised a great shout and drove the Trojans forward, and the tide of battle turned. Diomedes of the war cry still held his ground. He met Hector at the edge of the fighting and hurled his spear with a shout. If Hector was a man, let him stand and face him. The spear caught Hector on the helmet, and the stone sent him reeling to the ground, his face in the dust. But he rose, and while the two circled each other, Paris drew his bow and loosed an arrow that struck Diomedes in the right shoulder, piercing the skin beside the nipple. The son of Tydeus climbed into his chariot and told Sthenelus to drive, and with the Danaans' greatest warrior gone, the collapse began. Now Hector ranged along the front like the dog star glimpsed through storm clouds, blazing and then vanishing, blazing again. He killed and killed. Sthenelus the son of Capaneus, Oilean Creon's son, Ormenos, and many more. The Danaans fled back toward the ships, and Hector pressed them hard, his spear driving through their ranks. He caught Machaon, the son of Asclepios, the healer who had saved so many lives, and wounded him in the right shoulder with a spear. When Nestor saw Machaon struck, he called to Diomedes to bring the wounded man to the ships. But Diomedes said he could not go. Nestor must drive. And so the old man took the reins, and the horses flew toward the ships with Machaon bleeding in the car. From a shore where he sat alone, Achilles saw the chariot coming and sent Patroclus to learn who had been hurt. It was the beginning of the end. Hector by now had driven the Trojans past the trench and was cutting down the Achaeans as they tried to make their stand among the ships. He burst through the gate with fire in his hands, and the ships burned. The turning tide. Agamemnon fights with the fury of a man who has been wronged and knows it, killing Trojans with a rage that even the gods acknowledge. But when the spear of Coon finds his arm and the pain of the wound strikes, the king is driven back to the ships, and with him goes the last hope of the Danaans. Hector sees the signal and drives forward, and the whole battle shifts. The chain of wounds. Agamemnon is wounded and retreats. Diomedes is wounded and retreats. Odysseus is wounded and driven back. Machaon is wounded and carried to the ships. One by one the best of the Achaeans fall, and each time Hector is there to fill the gap they leave. By the end of the day, the Trojans have burned a ship and stand at the very edge of the water. Achilles, watching from the shore, sends Patroclus to inquire, and the sending will cost them both everything. Zeus had sent Iris to Hector with a promise. As long as the son of Atreus raged among the champions, Hector was to hold back and let the others fight. But once the king was struck by spear or arrow and climbed back into his chariot, then the power would be given to Hector to drive the Achaeans all the way to the ships, from the moment the sun climbed to its highest until darkness fell. And when the wound came and the king retreated, Hector leapt from his chariot and raised a cry, and the Trojans surged forward like a wave breaking on a shore. The fighting was close and terrible. Men fell on both sides, their blood soaking the earth. Zeus drove dark dew from the sky, a sign of the many strong heads that would fall to Hades that day. The two armies met like reapers cutting their way toward each other across a field of wheat, and where they met the ground was red. Diomedes of the great war cry still held his ground. He met Hector face to face at the edge of the ditch and hurled his spear with a shout that carried over the roar of battle. The stone on Hector's helmet caught the blow and sent him staggering, his face in the dust. He rose, and the two circled each other like lions over a kill. But Paris, the man of beauty, drew his bow and loosed an arrow at Diomedes while he was still taunting Hector. The point struck the right shoulder, piercing the skin beside the nipple. The son of Tydeus climbed into his chariot and told Sthenelus to drive him back from the fighting. He pulled the spear from his wound, and the blood ran down his chest, and with the best of the Danaans gone, the collapse began. Now the Trojans surged forward. Hector killed Sthenelus the son of Capaneus, and Creon the son of Oileus, and Ormenos, and many more whose names the singer lists, but whose lives are spent in a breath. The Danaans fled back toward the ships, and the Trojans pressed them hard, their bronze flashing in the morning light. Hector's spear drove through the ranks like a plow through soil, and where it struck, men fell. With Diomedes gone, The weight fell on Odysseus the many-cunning, who fought at the front and killed Coon, the son of Antenor, but took a spear himself in the forearm. He held his ground and killed another, then climbed into his chariot. When Machaon the healer, the son of the god of medicine, was wounded in the shoulder by Hector's spear, Nestor took him up in the car and drove toward the ships. It was then that Achilles, sitting alone on the beach where the sea met the sand, saw the chariot coming with the wounded man. He sent Patroclus to find out who had been hurt, and the old horseman Nestor told him everything: the wounds, the retreat, the fury of Hector. He begged Patroclus to go to Achilles and plead with him, or if he would not fight, at least to let Patroclus go in his armor, wearing his shield and driving his chariot. The plan hung in the air like a prayer that would not be answered. The turning tide. Agamemnon fights with the fury of a man who has been wronged and knows it, killing Trojans with a rage that even the gods acknowledge. But when the spear of Coon finds his arm and the pain of the wound strikes, the king is driven back to the ships, and with him goes the last hope of the Danaans. Hector sees the signal and drives forward, and the whole battle shifts. The chain of wounds. Agamemnon is wounded and retreats. Diomedes is wounded and retreats. Odysseus is wounded and driven back. Machaon is wounded and carried to the ships. One by one the best of the Achaeans fall, and each time Hector is there to fill the gap they leave. By the end of the day, the Trojans have burned a ship and stand at the very edge of the water. Achilles, watching from the shore, sends Patroclus to inquire, and the sending will cost them both everything. Quote, "As the sharp sorrow of pain descends on a woman in labor, the bitterness that the hard spirits of childbirth bring on Hera's daughters, who hold the power of the bitter birth pangs, so the sharp pains began to break in on the strength of Atreides." Quote, Hector ranged on, now flaring along the front, now shouting his orders back toward the rear, all of him armed in bronze aflash like lightning flung by Father Zeus with his battle shield of thunder. Book 12. While Patroclus tended the wounded within the shelter, the fighting raged outside the wall that the Achaeans had built around their ships. The wall had been raised without offerings to the gods, and it would not stand for long. So long as Hector lived and Achilles raged in anger, and the citadel of Priam remained unbreached, the wall held firm. But when the bravest among the Trojans had fallen, and the Achaeans too had been beaten down, and in the 10th year the city was taken, then Poseidon and Apollo would turn the rivers against it and wash it into the sea. But that was still far off. Now the Trojans came against it with the fury of men who saw the ships within their reach. Hector fought like a wild boar at bay. Polydamas the careful counselor stood beside him and spoke. The ditch was deep and lined with stakes, the wall was narrow, and if Zeus meant to destroy the Argives, he should do it once, out on the open plain. But if they should be driven back into the trench, there would be no way out. He told of an eagle that had carried a serpent in its talons, but had let it fall before reaching its nest, a sign that even in victory, many Trojans would fall. Hector answered him with a hard word. Birds meant nothing to him. One omen was best, to fight for one's own country. He would not be held back by the counsel of a coward. And if Polydamas held his tongue, the spear would answer for him. Zeus, watching from the ridges of Ida, hurled a gale against the ships that blinded the Danaans and handed the day to Hector. The Trojans surged against the wall, battering at the towers and pulling at the stakes with levers, and the Argives fought back from the rampart with stones and spears. The two Ajaxes ranged along the wall, cheering on the defenders, urging them to hold. Sarpedon, the son of Zeus, led the Lycians against the wall, and with Glaucus beside him, he climbed the rampart like a lion scaling a fence. But Ajax the Great struck him back with a spear, and Glaucus was wounded by an arrow from Teucros the bowman and leapt down from the wall. Then Hector, seeing that the Lycians had been driven back, took up a boulder that no two men could have lifted, a stone that stood before the gates, pointed at the top and broad at the base, and Zeus made it light in his hands. He swung it against the doors of the gate, and the hinges burst, and the door bar shattered, and the stone tore through with a crash. The gates fell open, and Hector burst through, his face dark as the coming of night, bronze blazing on his body, fire in his hands. Behind him, the Trojans poured through the breach like a river breaking its banks, and the wall was taken. The Argives fled back toward the ships in terror. The Trojans swarmed over the rampart and among the shelters, and the bronze flashed, and the dust rose, and the cries of the dying filled the air. Menestheus, the son of Peteos, called for the two Ajaxes to come to his aid, and Telamonian Ajax went with his brother Teucros, the bowman, to where the Lycians were pressing hardest. Ajax killed Epicles with a great rock torn from the battlements, and Teucros wounded Glaucus with an arrow, and the Lycians gave ground. But Hector was already through the gates, and the wall was breached, and there was no holding back the tide. The two armies fought across the battlements like men measuring a boundary between two fields, hewing at each other's shields and at the oxhide straps that guarded their chests. Rocks flew from both sides like snow driven by a storm, and the whole length of the wall thundered beneath them. Asios, the son of Hyrtacus, drove his chariot to the gates and found them shut, and he cried out in anguish that even Zeus was a liar, for he had promised that the Trojans would take the ships. But the gates were held by two Lapith warriors, Polypoetes and Leontius, who stood like oaks on a mountain ridge, their roots deep in the earth, and they killed Asios and drove back the Trojans. Still the Trojans pressed. Paris and Hector, the two sons of Priam, led the charge against the gate where the two Ajaxes stood, and the stones flew like hail, and the spears cracked against the shields. Deiphobos and Polydamas fought beside Hector, and the air was thick with the noise of bronze on bronze and the cries of men. The wall groaned under the assault, and the gates were battered and the door bars bent. And then Hector lifted the great stone and smashed through, and the way was open. The fall of the wall, the Achaean wall, built without the god's blessing, cannot stand. Polydamas warns Hector of an omen, an eagle that dropped a serpent before reaching its nest, meaning that even in victory, many Trojans will die. Hector refuses to listen. He lifts a boulder that no two men could move and smashes through the gates, and the Trojans pour in. The wall as foreshadowing. After Troy falls, Poseidon and Apollo will send the rivers of Ida against the wall and wash it into the sea. The wall that was built in defiance of the gods will be destroyed by them. This is the first of many moments where the action of the present reaches beyond itself to the long arc of fate. Quote, bird signs, fight for your country. That is the best, the only omen. Quote, so long as Hector was still alive, and Achilles was angry, so long as the citadel of Lord Priam was a city untaken. For this time the great wall of the Achaeans stood firm. Book 13. When Zeus had driven the Trojans and Hector against the ships, he turned his shining eyes away to the land of the Thracian riders and the Mysians who fight at close quarters, and the proud Hippomolgoi, drinkers of milk, and the Albaioi, most righteous of all men. He did not at all now turn his shining eyes upon Troy land, for he had no idea in mind that any one of the immortals would come down to stand by either Danaans or Trojans. But the powerful shaker of the earth kept no blind watch. He sat and admired the fighting and the run of the battle, aloft on top of the highest summit of timbered Samos, the Thracian place, and from there all Ida appeared before him, and the city of Priam was plain to see, and the ships of the Achaeans. There he came up out of the water, and sat, and pitied the Achaeans who were beaten by the Trojans, and blamed Zeus for it in bitterness. He came down from the craggy mountain, striding on rapid feet, and the tall mountains trembled and the timber under the immortal feet of Poseidon's progress. He took 3 long strides forward, and in the 4th came to his goal, Aigai, where his glorious house was built in the water's depth, glittering with gold, imperishable forever. Going there he harnessed under his chariot his bronze-shod horses, flying-footed, with long manes streaming of gold, and put on clothing of gold about his own body, and took up the golden lash, carefully compacted, and climbed up into his chariot and drove it across the waves. About him the sea beasts came up from their deep places and played in his path, and acknowledged their master, and the sea stood apart before him, rejoicing. The Trojans came on like flame, like a storm cloud, after Hector the son of Priam, raging relentless, roaring and crying as one. And their hopes ran high of capturing the ships of the Achaeans and killing the best men beside them. But Poseidon, who circles the earth and shakes it, rose up out of the deep water to stir on the Argives, likening himself in form and weariless voice to Calchas. He spoke to the two Ajaxes. They must save the Achaean people, holding where Hector burned the brightest. He struck both of them with his staff and filled them with powerful valor, and he made their limbs light, and their feet and their hands above them, and burst into winged flight himself, like a hawk with quick wings who from the huge height of an impassable rock lifting leans to flight to pursue some other bird over the wide land. The younger Ajax knew him first and told his brother. This was not Calchas the seer, for he had seen the god's form as he departed, the tracks of his feet, the stride from behind. Gods are conspicuous, and now the spirit inside his breast drove him all the harder to carry on the war, and his feet and hands were eager. Telamonian Ajax felt it too, the power in his spear, the strength that raced through his limbs, and he longed to meet Hector face to face in the fury of the open fight. Poseidon went on among the Argives, stirring the ranks, raising the heart of Teucros and Lydos, of Peneleos and Dipyros and Thoas, of Marians and Antilocos, all of them eager for battle. He called out to them in a voice like the seer's, "Shame on the Argives if they let the Trojans take the ships." Even though Agamemnon had wronged Achilles, they could not hang back from the fighting now. The hearts of great men could be healed, but there was no remedy for the shame of cowardice. For Hector, the great war cry, was fighting beside the vessels, and the Trojans had burst the gate and broken the bar. His voice went through the army like a shock wave, and the Achaeans rallied. The best-picked men formed a wall around the two Ajaxes, spear by spear, shield by shield, the rims overlapping, buckler to buckler, helm to helm, man to man mast height, and the horsehair crests on glittering helmet horns brushed as they tossed their heads. The spears they shook in daring hands packed into jagged lines of battle, single-minded fighters facing straight ahead, prime for the charge. Hector crashed against them like a boulder torn from a rock face by a river swollen with snow. He rushed at them, roaring, but the wall held. The sons of the Achaeans stabbed at him with swords and leaf-headed spears and thrust him backward, staggering. He lifted his voice and called to the Trojans to stand with him, for the Achaeans would not hold him off for long if the thunderous lord of Hera drove him on. The fighting was close and terrible. Teucros killed Imbrios the spear fighter, a man who had married a bastard daughter of Priam and lived at the king's side, honored as his own children. Teucros stabbed him under the ear and wrenched the spear out, and he dropped like an ash tree felled on the crest of a mountain by a bronze axe. The younger Ajax, in anger for Amphimachos who had fallen, hewed away Imbrios' head from the soft neck and threw it spinning like a ball through the throng until it came to rest at the feet of Hector. Then Poseidon was angered about the heart at his grandson's slaying, and the god went forth among the shelters and ships and stirred the Danaans, and worked disaster against the Trojans. He came upon Aeneas, the spear-famed, who was on his way from a companion wounded in the hollow behind the knee. Poseidon likened his voice to Thoas, and asked where were those threats the Achaeans had given against the Trojans. Idomeneus answered that no man was responsible, since all of them understood how to wage war. It was Zeus who wished the Achaeans to die here, forgotten, far from Argos. Then Poseidon dropped his disguise and said, "May that man who this day hangs back from the fighting never win home again out of Troy. Come, take up your armor and go with me, since we, being two, might bring some advantage." Idomeneus armed himself and went with Marians, and the two of them went into the fighting like Ares and his son Panic, who go forth from Thrace to fight the Ephyri or the Phlegians, but turn deaf ears to the prayers of both sides, handing glory to either side they choose. They strode to battle helmed in gleaming bronze, and Marians asked where they should join the fighting, right, center, or left, for nowhere else were the Argives so outfought. Idomeneus answered, "The center was where the fighting thickest was, where Hector had shattered the oak spear of Asios and broken the chariot line. That was where the Trojans pressed hardest, and that was where they would make their stand. The battle raged on. Poseidon moved among the Achaeans, raising the heart of every man he passed, filling them with the strength that comes from the gods alone. He came upon the two Ajaxes and stood beside them, and the Trojans who saw the wall of Achaeans standing firm before the ships began to falter. Hector still raged at the front, but the spear walls held, and the shields overlapped like the scales of fish, and the spears thrust forward in a bristling hedge that no man could break. Teucros from behind the wall loosed arrow after arrow, and each shaft found its mark, and the Trojans fell. But Hector would not be denied. He called to the Trojans and the Lycians, the Dardanians who fight at close quarters, and charged again at the wall. He was like a wave that rises high and breaks against a cliff, and the spray flies upward and the roar echoes along the shore. So Hector crashed against the Achaean line, and the line bent but did not break. The two Ajaxes met him spear to spear, shield to shield, and the fighting was close and terrible, and the dust rose and the cries of the dying filled the air. The battle raged on, and the Trojans pressed hard, but the wall of Achaeans held, and the ships were still safe. Poseidon had given the Achaeans the strength to endure, and for this day at least, the ships would not burn. Poseidon's intervention. When Zeus looks away from Troy, thinking no god will intervene, Poseidon, the shaker of the earth, rises from the sea and enters the battle on the Achaean side. He appears first to the two Ajaxes, then to Idomeneus and Marians, filling them with strength and courage. The god's intervention turns the tide, and the Achaeans rally to hold the line at the ships. The wall of spears. The best Achaean fighters form a dense phalanx around the two Ajaxes, shield by shield, spear by spear, their horsehair crests brushing as they toss their heads. It is the image of the Achaean army at its finest, a wall of men who will not break, standing against the fury of Hector and the Trojans. The singer lingers on the beauty of the formation, the order and discipline of men who have chosen to fight together. Quote, "So the Trojans, gathered into a pack, like flame, like a storm cloud, came on after Hector the son of Priam, raging relentless, roaring and crying as one." Quote, "The two Ajaxes blazing in battle fury saw to Imbrius now, as two lions seizing a goat from under the guard of circling rip-toothed hounds, lugging the carcass on through dense matted brush." Book 14. Now Nestor failed not to hear their outcry, though he was drinking his wine. He spoke to Machaon the healer. "Sit here and drink," he said, "while I go out and find some watchpoint." He took up the shield of his son Thrasymedes and a powerful spear, and stood outside the shelter, and at once saw a shameful action. Men driven to flight, and others harrying them in confusion, the great-hearted Trojans, and the wall of the Achaeans overthrown. He stood there stunned, as when the open sea is deeply stirred to the groundswell, but stays in one place and waits the rapid onset of tearing gusts, nor rolls its surf onward in either direction until from Zeus the wind is driven down to decide it. He went to find Agamemnon, and found him with Odysseus and Diomedes, all of them wounded and leaning on their spears. Agamemnon spoke. The wall had done them no good, nor the ditch either, and such was the way it must be pleasing to Zeus that the Achaeans must die here, forgotten and far from Argos. He proposed they haul the ships to the sea and sail by night, for there was no shame in running from disaster. Odysseus looked darkly at him. "What sort of word escaped your teeth's barrier? Ruinous. I wish you commanded some other army, and were not lord over us. Are you really thus eager to abandon the wide-wayed city of the Trojans, over which we have taken so many sorrows? Do not say it. Let some other Achaean haul the ships if he will, but we too will stay until we have witnessed the fall of Troy." Diomedes spoke last, and his words were hard. They should go and fight, even wounded, and leave the battle gear to those who had less, since they could still stand in the front line. Neither did the glorious shaker of the earth keep blind watch, but came among them now in the likeness of an old man, and took hold of Agamemnon by the right hand, and spoke. "There will still be a time," he said, "when the lords of Troy shall send dust wide on the plain, and you yourself shall look on them as they take flight for their city away from the ships and the shelters. Then he swept on over the plain with a huge cry, like the yell 9,000 men send up, or 10,000, in battle, as they close in the hateful strife of the war god. So huge was the cry the powerful earth-shaker let go from his lungs, and in the heart of every Achaean he implanted great strength to carry the battle on and fight without flinching. Now Hera, she of the golden throne, standing on Olympos' horn, looked out with her eyes, and saw at once how Poseidon was bustling about the battle where men win glory, and her heart was happy. But then she saw Zeus sitting along the loftiest summit on Ida of the springs, and in her eyes he was hateful. She went into her chamber, which her beloved son Hephaestus had built for her, and arrayed herself in loveliness. She cleansed her body with ambrosia and anointed herself with oil of olive. The breathtaking, redolent oil she kept beside her, one stir of the scent in the bronze floor halls of Zeus, and a perfumed cloud would drift from heaven down to earth. She combed her hair and twisted her braids with expert hands, and sleek, luxurious, shining down from her deathless head they fell, cascading. She pinned the wondrous robes across her breast with a golden brooch, and sashed her waist with a waistband floating 100 tassels, and into her earlobes she looped her earrings, ripe mulberry clusters dangling in triple drops, and the silver glints they cast could catch the heart. She went to Aphrodite and borrowed the zone of many beguilements, in which all things were figured: loveliness, passion, the whispered endearment that steals the heart away even from the thoughtful. Then she found Sleep, the brother of Death, on Lemnos, and clung fast to his hand and begged him to put Zeus to sleep. Sleep remembered the last time he had done this favor, when Heracles sailed from Ilion, and Zeus had been so angry he would have sunk him into the sea if night had not saved him. But Hera swore by the river Styx and promised him Pasithea, one of the younger Graces, the one he had longed for all his days, and Sleep agreed. Hera went to the peak of Gargaros on towering Ida, and Zeus, who gathers the clouds, saw her and was seized with desire. She told him she was going to visit Okeanos and Tethys to resolve their long discord. But Zeus spoke, "What need of that now? Later. Come, let us go to bed and lose ourselves in love. Never has such a lust for goddess or mortal woman flooded my heart and overwhelmed me so." He gathered a golden cloud about them, and underneath them the divine earth broke into young, fresh grass, into dewy clover, crocus, and hyacinth, so thick and soft it held the hard ground deep away from them. They lay together and drew the cloud about them, and from it the glimmering dew descended, and the father slept unshaken on the peak of Gargaros with his wife in his arms, when Sleep and passion had stilled him. But gently Sleep went on the run to the ships of the Achaeans, and told Poseidon, "Defend the Danaans now with all your heart, and give them glory, though only for a little, while Zeus still sleeps." And Poseidon sprang among the foremost, and urged them on with a great voice. And the Achaeans charged, and the Trojans gave ground. And Hector himself was driven back, and the spear walls of the Achaeans pushed the Trojans past the ditch and toward the wall. The seduction of Zeus. Hera dresses in all her loveliness, borrows Aphrodite's zone of many beguilements, and persuades Sleep to put Zeus to sleep. On the peak of Ida, Zeus is overwhelmed with desire, and they lie together beneath a golden cloud of dew and new grass. While the king of the gods sleeps, Poseidon rallies the Achaeans and drives the Trojans back. One of the most human scenes in the epic, the queen of the gods using her beauty and her wits to outmaneuver her husband, and the king of the gods reduced to desire and sleep like any mortal man. The army rallies. With Zeus asleep, Poseidon goes among the Achaeans and fills them with strength. The kings who were wounded, Agamemnon, Odysseus, Diomedes, arm themselves again and lead the charge. The army pushes the Trojans back past the ditch and toward the wall, and for a time it seems the Achaeans might drive them all the way back to the city. Quote, "Never has such a lust for goddess or mortal woman flooded my pounding heart and overwhelmed me so." Quote, so huge was the cry the powerful earth-shaker let go from his lungs, and in the heart of every Achaean implanted great strength to carry the battle on and fight without flinching. Book 15. But after they had crossed back over the ditch and the sharp stakes in flight, and many had gone down under the hands of the Danaans, they checked about once more and stood their ground by the chariots, green for fear and terrified. But now Zeus wakened by Hera of the gold throne on the high places of Ida, and stood suddenly upright, and saw the Achaeans and Trojans, these driven to flight, the others harrying them in confusion, these last Argives, and saw among them the lord Poseidon. He saw Hector lying in the plain, his companions sitting around him, he dazed at the heart and breathing painfully, vomiting blood, since not the weakest Achaean had hit him. Then the father of gods and men, seeing Hector, pitied him and looked scowling terribly at Hera, and spoke. Hopeless one, it was your evil design, your treachery, that stayed brilliant Hector from battle, terrified his people. I do not know, perhaps for this contrivance of evil and pain you will win first reward when I lash you with whip strokes. Do you not remember that time you hung from high, and on your feet I slung 2 anvils, and about your hands drove a golden chain, unbreakable? You among the clouds and the bright sky hung, nor could the gods about tall Olympos endure it, and stood about, but could not set you free. I will remind you of all this, so you will give up your deceptions. See if your lovemaking in bed will help you. That way you lay with me apart from the gods, and deceived me. Hera was frightened, and spoke in her own defense, swearing by the river Styx and by the bed of their marriage that she had not helped Poseidon. Zeus was softened, and he smiled and spoke. If you will accord with me in the years to come, then go and summon Iris and Apollo. Iris shall tell Poseidon to quit the war and return to his own ocean halls, and Apollo shall drive Hector back to battle, breathe power back into his lungs, make him forget the agonies that now are wearing out his senses. Let him drive strengthless panic into the Achaeans, and turn them back once more. Let them be driven in flight, and tumble back on the benched ships of Achilles. And he shall rouse up Patroclus his companion, and glorious Hector shall cut down Patroclus with the spear before Iliad, after he has killed many others of the young men, and among them Sarpedon. In anger for him brilliant Achilles shall then kill Hector, and from then on I would make the fighting surge back from the vessels always and continuously, until the Achaeans capture headlong Ilion through the designs of Athene. Hera obeyed, and went back to tall Olympos from the mountains of Ida. As the thought flashes in the mind of a man who, traversing much territory, thinks of things in the mind's awareness. I wish I were this place, or this, so rapidly in her eagerness winged Hera, a goddess. She came to sheer Olympos, and entered among the assembled immortal gods in the house of Zeus. And they seeing her rose all to swarm about her, and lifted their cups in greeting. But Poseidon was deeply vexed when Iris brought him the word of Zeus. He spoke, Great though he is, this that he has said is too much. If he will force me against my will, me, who am his equal in rank. Since we are 3 brothers born by Rhea to Kronos, Zeus, and I, and the third is Hades, lord of the dead men. All was divided among us 3 ways, each given his domain. I, when the lots were shaken, drew the gray sea to live in forever. But earth and high Olympos are common to all 3. Therefore I am no part of the mind of Zeus. Let him in tranquility and powerful as he is stay satisfied with his 3rd share. And let him absolutely stop frightening me, as if I were mean with his hands. Yet Iris reminded him, the hearts of the great can always change, and the Furies always stand by older brothers. And Poseidon yielded ground, and went down into the bright sea, and the Achaeans missed him. Apollo went to Hector and breathed power into his lungs and healed his wounds. And the son of Priam rose up, and the Trojans charged again with a great cry, and the Achaeans gave ground. The Trojans drove them back past the wall and toward the ships, and the fighting was close and terrible, and the ships burned. Ares the war god, seeing his son Ascalaphus slain in the fighting, struck against both his big thighs with the flats of his hands and cried out in grief. He would go among the ships of the Achaeans and avenge his son's slaughter, even though it be his fate to be struck by Zeus's thunderbolt and sprawl in the blood and dust. He ordered Fear and Terror to harness his horses and got into his shining armor. But Athene, in her fear for the sake of all the immortals, sprang up and took the helmet off his head, the shield from his shoulders, and snatched the spear from his heavy hand, and reasoned with him. "Madman, maze of your wits, this is ruin. Do you not hear what Hera tells us, she coming back even now from Zeus? Do you wish, after running the course of many misfortunes yourself, still to come back to Olympos under compulsion, and plant seed of great sorrow among the rest of us?" Ares was silenced and sat down. The Trojans pressed on. Hector, with Apollo's strength in him, drove at the front, and the Achaeans fell back in terror. The wall was breached, the gates were shattered, and the Trojans poured through like a river, breaking its banks. The ships burned, and the smoke rose, and the cries of the dying filled the air. The Achaeans huddled by the ships, and the Trojans surrounded them, and it seemed as if the end had come. Hector ranged among the ships like a flame, and wherever he turned the Achaeans fled. He killed Aristolocos at the stern of a ship, and Podas the swift runner, and Iolos the son of Apasos, and Clytios the son of Laertes' own brother. Each man fell where he stood, and the bronze flashed, and the blood ran, and the ships burned. Teucros tried to hold the line, but Apollo turned aside his arrows, and a stone from Hector's hand broke the string of his bow. Teucros leapt back behind the shield of Ajax, and the Trojans pressed on. Ajax called to the Argives to bring fire, to burn the ships, and to fight for their lives. He drove into the Trojans with his great spear, and wherever he turned they gave ground. But Hector found a ship that was dry and burning, and he stood at the prow and gripped the edge with both hands, and the Trojans crowded around him, bringing fire. The ship burned, and the smoke rose, and the Achaeans were driven back in terror. But Poseidon, watching from beneath the sea, was deeply vexed. He had lost the Achaeans, and he feared for them, and he blamed Zeus for it in bitterness. The Trojans would not stop until they had burned every ship and killed every Achaean, and the plan of Zeus would be fulfilled. Zeus reclaims control. When Zeus wakes and sees Poseidon helping the Achaeans, he is furious. He threatens Hera with the punishment he once gave her, hanging her from the sky with anvils chained to her feet. Hera protests, and Zeus reveals his long plan. Patroclus will die, and then Achilles will return to battle. Here the cruelty of the design becomes clear. The death of Patroclus is no accident, but a pattern, and the suffering of the Achaeans serves a purpose only Zeus can see. The hierarchy of the gods. Poseidon's speech about the division of the world among the three brothers. Zeus got the sky, Poseidon the sea, Hades the underworld, and the earth and Olympus are common to all, is one of the most important passages in the Iliad. It reveals the political structure of the divine world and the tension between Zeus's authority and the rights of his brothers. Poseidon yields, but reluctantly, and his resentment will linger. Quote, "Never has such a lust for goddess or mortal woman flooded my pounding heart and overwhelmed me so. Not even then, when I made love to Ixion's wife who bore me Pirithous, rival to all the gods in wisdom." Quote, "Three brothers we are, all sprung from Cronus, all of us brought to birth by Rhea, Zeus and I, Hades the third, Lord of the dead beneath the earth. The world was split three ways. Each received his realm." Book 16. So they fought on both sides for the sake of the strong benched vessel. Meanwhile, Patroclus came to the shepherd of the people, Achilles, and stood by him and wept warm tears, like a spring dark running that down the face of a rock impassable drips its dim water. And swift-footed, brilliant Achilles looked on him in pity and spoke. "Why then are you crying like some poor little girl, Patroclus, who runs after her mother and begs to be picked up and carried? You are like such a one, dropping these soft tears. Could you have some news to tell, from me or the Myrmidons?" Then, groaning heavily, Patroclus answered, "Son of Peleus, do not be angry. Such grief has fallen upon the Achaeans. For all those who were before the bravest in battle are lying up among the ships with arrow or spear wounds. The son of Tydeus was hit by an arrow, and Odysseus has a pike wound, and Agamemnon the spear-famed, and Eurypylos has been wounded in the thigh. And over these the healers skilled in medicine are working to cure their wounds. But you, Achilles, who could do anything with you? May no such anger take me as this that you cherish. Cursed courage! What other man born hereafter shall be advantaged, unless you beat aside from the Argives this shameful destruction? Achilles was softened, and he said, "The girl they took from me, let them take her back. I have said I would not give over my anger until the fighting came up to my own ships. But even so, Patroclus, draw my glorious armor about your shoulders and lead the Myrmidons into the fighting, if truly the black cloud of the Trojans has taken position strongly about our ships. But obey to the end this word I put upon your attention. When you have driven them from the ships, come back. Although later the thunderous Lord of Hera might grant you to win glory, do not press on beyond the ships. Let some other Achaean drive the Trojans from the ships, for I do not want to share your glory." Patroclus armed himself in Achilles' armor. First he placed along his legs the beautiful greaves, linked with silver fastenings. Afterward he girded on about his chest the corslet starry and elaborate of swift-footed Aeacides. Across his shoulders he slung the sword, and above it the great shield, huge and heavy. Over his mighty head he set the well-fashioned helmet with the horsehair crest, and the plumes nodded terribly above it. Only he did not take the spear of blameless Aeacides, huge, heavy, thick, which no one else of all the Achaeans could handle, but Achilles alone knew how to wield it. The Pelian ash spear which Cheiron had brought to his father from high on Pelion to be death for fighters. The Myrmidons rallied around him like wolves, hungry as wolves that rend and bolt raw flesh, hearts filled with battle frenzy that never dies. So while the Myrmidon captains swarming round Achilles' dauntless friend in arms. And Patroclus shouted and drove into the Trojans, and the Trojans fled in terror, thinking Achilles himself had returned to battle. The wall was taken back, the ships were saved, and the Trojans fell in heaps before the spear of Patroclus. He killed Prius first, and then the Ister, and Aramas, and Amphitheros, and Apolts, and Tlepolemus, and Echeclos, and Polydamas, and Christolos, and Arisba. One after another they fell, and the dust was wet with blood. Patroclus killed 12 men before he drove the Trojans back to the wall, and then he turned back to pin them against the ships and would not allow them to climb back into their city. As underneath the hurricane all the black earth is burdened on an autumn day, when Zeus sends down the most violent waters in deep rage against mortals after they stir him to anger, so huge rose the noise from the horses of Troy in their running. But Sarpedon, the son of Zeus, lord of the Lycians, stood his ground against Patroclus, and the two fought face to face. Zeus watched from above, and he was torn between letting his son live or letting him die. But Hera reminded him, "If you send your son back alive to Lycia, what shall other mortals think when one of the gods does not let his own son die? Let him die," she said, "and send sleep and death to carry him to Lycia, where his brothers and countrymen will bury him with full royal rites." Zeus was moved, and he let the fight go on. Patroclus hurled his spear and struck Sarpedon in the chest, and he fell like an oak or a white poplar or towering pine that shipwrights hewed down with whetted axes for sturdy ship timber. He died raging still, crying out to his beloved companion Glaucus to fight for his body. But Glaucus was wounded, and he prayed to Apollo, and Apollo healed him, and the Lycians rallied. Now Zeus would no longer let Patroclus drive the Trojans back. He sent Apollo against him, and Apollo struck Patroclus from behind, shattering his shield and his helmet and his armor. The spear in his grip was shattered, and he stood there senseless. Then Euphorbus the Dardan speared him between the shoulder blades, and Patroclus staggered back, trying to escape death. But Hector was waiting, watching. He saw Patroclus wounded and staggering, and he rushed across the lines and drove his spear through the bowels, and the brazen point went jutting straight out through Patroclus' back. Down he crashed, and horror gripped the Achaean armies, as when some lion overpowers a tireless wild boar up on a mountain summit, battling in all their fury over a little spring of water. both beasts craving to slake their thirst, but the lion beats him down with sheer brute force. So now, with a close thrust, Hector the son of Priam tore the life from the fighting son of Menoetius, from Patroclus who had killed so many men in war. And Hector glowered over him. Patroclus, surely you must have thought you'd storm my city down. You'd wrest from the wives of Troy their day of freedom. But they will not, for I am here, and I am stronger than you. And Patroclus, dying, spoke. You may exult for now, Hector, but the son of Zeus and Thetis will kill you before the ships. And Hector answered, What prophecy is this? Even great Achilles must die someday. And he pulled the spear from the wound, and Patroclus drew his last breath, and the dark mist closed over his eyes. Hector stripped the armor from Patroclus' back, and took the helmet and the shield and the sword, and he stood there in Achilles' armor, and the Trojans cheered. The Achaeans were driven back, and the Trojans pressed on, and the ships burned, and the fighting raged all night long. The death of Patroclus. When Patroclus falls, the turning point of the Iliad arrives. He has gone into battle wearing Achilles' armor, and the Trojans thought Achilles himself had returned. But Apollo strikes him from behind, and Euphorbus spears him, and Hector delivers the final blow. The death is not a heroic duel between equals. It is a death by treachery and overwhelming force, and it seals the fate of everyone. Patroclus, Hector, and Achilles. Even the bravest man cannot fight against the will of the gods. Achilles' warning. Before Patroclus goes into battle, Achilles tells him, Come back after you have driven the Trojans from the ships. Do not press beyond the ships. Do not try to take Troy. But Patroclus, caught up in the fury of battle, drives too far, and Hector kills him. The warning is the hinge of the tragedy. If Patroclus had listened, Achilles would not have to die. But he does not listen, and the fate that Thetis prophesied is fulfilled. Quote, Why then are you crying like some poor little girl, Patroclus, who runs after her mother and begs to be picked up and carried, and clings to her dress, and holds her back when she tries to hurry, and gazes tearfully into her face, until she is picked up? Quote, As when some lion overpowers a tireless wild boar up on a mountain summit, battling in all their fury over a little spring of water, both beasts craving to slake their thirst, but the lion beats him down with sheer brute force as the boar fights for breath. So now, with a close thrust, Hector the son of Priam tore the life from the fighting son of Menoetius. Book 17. As Patroclus went down before the Trojans in the hard fighting, he was not unseen by Atreus' son, warlike Menelaus, who stalked through the ranks of the champions, helmed in the bright bronze, and bestrode the body, as over a firstborn calf the mother cow stands lowing, she who has known no children before this. So Menelaus of the fair hair stood over Patroclus and held the spear and the perfect circle of his shield before him, raging to cut down any man who might come forth against him. Nor did the fall of blameless Patroclus pass unattended by Euphorbus, Panthus' son, who standing close to face him spoke, Son of Atreus, give way, let the bloody spoils be, get back from this body, since before me no one of the Trojans struck Patroclus down. Thereby let me win this great glory. Deeply stirred, Menelaus answered, Father Zeus, it is not well for the proud man to glory. Neither the fury of the leopard is such, not such as the lion's, nor the fury of the devastating wild boar, within whose breast the spirit is biggest and vaunts in the pride of his strength, is so great as goes the pride in these sons of Panthus. Yet even the strength of Hyperinor, breaker of horses, had no joy of his youth when he stood against me and taunted me. So I think I can break your strength as well. He spoke so, but did not persuade Euphorbus, who cast his spear and struck the shield, but could not pierce it. Then Menelaus struck, and the spear went clean through the neck, and Euphorbus fell. Menelaus stripped the armor from his body and would have carried it back, but Apollo sent Hector against him, and Hector came in a chariot, and Menelaus gave ground, though unwillingly, for he feared to leave the body of Patroclus unguarded. As a lion over a carcass, so Menelaus stood over Patroclus, and his spear was lifted, and his shield was raised, and he longed to kill Hector. But Hector called to the Trojans, "All together now, for the strongest of the Argives has been slain, and the armor of Achilles is ours." And the Trojans surged forward with a great cry, and Menelaus was driven back, though he killed one and wounded another, and the Trojans came on like a fire. Now the Achaeans rallied. Menelaus called to them, "O friends, champions, attendants of Ares, come and defend the body of Patroclus, though he is dead." And Ajax the Telamonian came, and Marians and Idomeneus and the other captains, and they formed a wall around the body, and the Trojans pressed on, and the fighting was close and terrible. Hector rushed at the body, and Ajax met him with his great spear, and Hector gave ground. Automedon tried to harness the horses of Achilles to carry the body back to the ships, but Hector saw him and came on, and Automedon was driven back. The battle raged on. The Trojans pressed forward, and the Achaeans gave ground, though they held the body. The dust rose, and the cries of the dying filled the air, and the sun moved across the sky, and the day wore on, and still the fighting did not stop. The Trojans would not let the body go, and the Achaeans would not give it up, and the two sides fought over the corpse as wolves fight over a stag. Hector circled the body like a hawk circling a hare, and the Achaeans tightened their ranks. He struck at Aia's shield, and Ajax struck back, and the spear splintered, and Hector drew back to have his spear refitted by a squire. Then Ajax hurled a great stone, a boulder that men had set for the butt of a ship, and it struck Hector's shield and sent him reeling. The Trojans pulled him back, groaning, and Menelaus called to the Achaeans to drag the body to the ships. But as they lifted it, Hector rallied the Trojans and charged again, and the Achaeans were driven back. The body was set down again, and the fighting resumed, fierce and unrelenting. Patroclus' immortal horses stood apart from the battle, weeping for their fallen driver, as Automedon tried to harness them. They refused to move, and their heads hung low to the ground, and their manes trailed in the dust. They wept for Patroclus, and their tears fell upon the sand, and the chariot sat empty and silent. The horses that had carried Achilles into battle, that had raced like the wind, now stood still and mourned. The Achaeans saw them, and their hearts were heavy, and the battle raged on around them. The Trojans pressed hard. Hector drove at the body again, and Ajax met him, and the two fought at close quarters, spear to spear, shield to shield. The fighting was close and terrible, and the Achaeans were pushed back, step by step, toward the ships. The body of Patroclus lay in the dust, and the Trojans fought to reach it, and the Achaeans fought to keep it from them. The day wore on, and the sun moved across the sky, and the battle did not stop. Then Iris came down from Olympos at the bidding of Hera, and found Menelaus and spoke. "Menelaus, beloved of Ares, if you can no longer defend the body, let it go. Let the Trojans take it. The Achaeans must not all die here for one man's sake. Go back and call the other captains to a council, and we will see what is best to be done." Menelaus heard her words, and he knew them for divine, and he went among the Achaeans and called them to gather. The Trojans pressed on, and the body lay in the dust, and the fighting raged around it. Ajax and Marians lifted the body and bore it toward the ships, and the Trojans followed, shouting. Hector led them, and he was like a flame, and the Achaeans gave ground. But Ajax held, and the body was carried to the ships, and the Trojans pressed on, and the battle raged at the very hulks. The day wore on, and the sun moved across the sky, and the Achaeans fought with the desperation of men who know that if the body falls, the war is lost. And still the Trojans came on, and the Achaeans held, and the body was safe for now, but the battle was not over. The fight for the body, the battle over Patroclus' body, is one of the most sustained and desperate in the Iliad. The Achaeans fight not for glory or for the city, but for the body of their fallen comrade, to bring it back to the ships and give it proper burial. The Trojans fight to keep it, to strip the armor and drag the corpse behind their chariots. It is a battle of honor and grief, and it reveals what the war means to both sides. not just the taking of Troy, but the treatment of the dead. Menelaus' finest hour. Menelaus stands over the body of Patroclus and fights off every Trojan who comes near. He kills Euphorbus, and when Hector comes, he stands his ground though he is outmatched. Here is the bravest moment for the man who started the war, the man whose wife was taken, and who has fought for 10 years to get her back. Here he fights not for his wife, but for his dead friend. And here he finds the dignity of a man who has finally found something worth dying for. Quote, "So Menelaus of the fair hair stood over Patroclus and held the spear and the perfect circle of his shield before him, raging to cut down any man who might come forth against him." Quote, "Neither the fury of the leopard is such, not such as the lion's, nor the fury of the devastating wild boar, within whose breast the spirit is biggest and vaunts in the pride of his strength, is so great as goes the pride in these sons of Panthos of the strong ash spear." Book 18. So these fought on in the likeness of blazing fire. Meanwhile Antilochus came, a swift-footed messenger, to Achilles, and found him sitting in front of the steep-horned ships, thinking over in his heart of things which had now been accomplished. Disturbed, Achilles spoke to the spirit in his own great heart. "Ah me, how is it that once again the flowing-haired Achaeans are driven out of the plain on their ships in fear and confusion? Surely, then, the strong son of Menoetius has perished." And now Antilochus came and wept warm tears, and gave Achilles his sorrowful message. Patroclus has fallen, and now they are fighting over his body, which is naked. Hector of the shining helm has taken his armor. He spoke, and the black cloud of sorrow closed on Achilles. In both hands he caught up the grimy dust, and poured it over his head and face, and fouled his handsome countenance, and the black ashes were scattered over his immortal tunic. And he himself, mightily in his might, in the dust lay at length, and took and tore his hair with his hands, and defiled it. And the handmaidens Achilles and Patroclus had taken captive, stricken at heart, cried out aloud, and came running out of doors about valiant Achilles, and all of them beat their breasts with their hands, and the limbs went slack in each of them. Thetis heard her son's cry from the salt green depths, where she sat with the old man of the sea, and she cried out in turn. And the Nereids gathered round, all the daughters of the sea, and they came rushing up from the depths, and Thetis led them to the shore. There she stood by her son, and took his head in her arms, and spoke. "Why then, child, do you lament? What sorrow has come to your heart now? Speak out, do not hide it. These things are brought to accomplishment through Zeus." But Achilles answered, "My mother, all these things the Olympian brought to accomplishment. But what pleasure is this to me, since my dear companion has perished, Patroclus, whom I love beyond all other companions, as well as my own life? I have lost him, and Hector, who killed him, has stripped away that gigantic armor. I wish you had gone on living then with the other goddesses of the sea, and that Peleus had married some mortal woman, since the spirit within does not drive me to go on living and be among men, except on condition that Hector first be beaten down under my spear and pay the price for stripping Patroclus." Thetis was moved, and she wept. "Then I must lose you soon, my child, by what you are saying, since it is decreed your death must come soon after Hector's." And Achilles answered, "I must die soon, then, since I was not to stand by my companion when he was killed. But even so, let me go and kill the man who killed him, and then I will accept my own death whenever Zeus wishes to bring it about." Thetis knew she could not dissuade him, and she went to Olympos to ask Hephaestus the smith to make new armor for her son. She came to the house of Hephaestus, and she wept and told him all her grief. The famous crippled smith replied, "Courage, anguish for all that armor, sweep it from your mind. If only I could hide him away from pain and death, that day his grim destiny comes to take Achilles. But as surely as glorious armor shall be his, armor that any man in the world of men will marvel at through all the years to come." And Hephaestus set to work. The bellows blew on the crucibles, breathing with all degrees of shooting, fiery heat, as the god hurried on. Bronze he flung in the blaze, tough durable bronze, and gold and silver and tin. And he forged the armor piece by piece, the shield, the breastplate, the greaves, the helmet. And on the shield he wrought the whole world. The shield was round and heavy, and on it Hephaestos forged the earth, the sea, the stars, and the sun and moon. He forged 2 cities, one at peace, one at war. In a city at peace, there was a wedding procession and the court of law and men arguing in the marketplace. In the city at war, there was a siege and men hiding in ambush by a river and the women washing clothes at the riverbank. He forged the fields of harvest, where reapers cut the grain and binders tied it, and the king stood among them, silent, glad at heart. He forged the vineyard, with grape pickers gathering the fruit, and a boy playing a lyre and singing the song of Linos. He forged the herd of cattle, attacked by lions, and the herdsmen shouting and their dogs barking. He forged the sheep pasture, and the dancing floor where young men and women danced, and a bride was led through the city, and torches burned, and the young men spun and leapt. He forged the sea, where dolphins swam and fish leapt, and a great whale was hunted by fishermen. He forged the city of Troy, besieged by Achaeans, and the Trojans inside the walls, and the fires burning, and the fighting at the gates. It was as if Hephaestos had put the whole world on the shield, the world of men, with their wars and their marriages, their harvests and their dances, their griefs and their joys. And Achilles looked at it, and knew that it was beautiful, and that he would soon die. Then Thetis brought the armor to Achilles, and he put it on, and it shone like the sun, and the fire of it blazed. He went to the trench, and stood at the edge, and let out a great cry, and Pallas Athene screamed with him, and the sound was like a trumpet blast, and the Trojans heard it and were terrified. They fled in panic, and 12 of their finest fighters died then and there, crushed by chariots, impaled on their own spears. And the Achaeans seized the chance to drag Patroclus' body out of range, and laid him on a bier, and Achilles wept, and the Myrmidons mourned. The shield of Achilles. The shield is the most famous passage in the Iliad, and one of the most extraordinary descriptions in all of literature. On a single shield, Hephaestos forges the whole world. 2 cities, one at peace and one at war, the fields of harvest, the vineyard, the herd of cattle, the sheep pasture, the dancing floor, the sea, the stars. It is as if the singer has paused to show the world that the war has destroyed, the world of ordinary life, of marriages and harvests and dances, the world that the soldiers left behind and will never see again. A world within a world, and a reminder of what is at stake in the war. Not just the city of Troy, but the whole of human life. Achilles' grief and rage. Achilles' grief for Patroclus is the emotional center of the Iliad. He pours dust over his head, tears his hair, and lies in the dust groaning. The handmaidens beat their breasts, and the horses weep. It is a grief so deep that it seems to shake the world. And from that grief comes rage, the rage that will drive him to kill Hector and then to die. Grief and rage are the same thing, and the deepest love is inseparable from the deepest violence. Quote, "In both hands he caught up the grimy dust, and poured it over his head and face, and fouled his handsome countenance, and the black ashes were scattered over his immortal tunic." Quote, "On the shield he wrought the whole earth, the sea, the stars, the sun and moon, and 2 cities, one at peace, one at war." Book 19. Now Dawn the yellow-robed arose from the river of ocean to carry her light to men and to immortals. And Thetis came to the ships and carried with her the gifts of Hephaestos. She found her beloved son lying in the arms of Patroclus, crying shrill, and his companions and their numbers about him mourned. She, shining among divinities, stood there beside them. She clung to her son's hand and called him by name and spoke, "My child, now, though we grieve for him, we must let this man lie dead, in the way he first was killed through the gods' designing. Accept rather from me the glorious arms of Hephaestos, so splendid, and such as no man has ever worn on his shoulders." The goddess set down the armor on the ground before Achilles, and all its elaboration clashed loudly. Trembling took hold of all the Myrmidons. None had the courage to look straight at it. They were afraid of it. Only Achilles looked, and as he looked the anger came harder upon him, and his eyes glittered terribly under his lids like sunflower. He was glad, holding in his hands the shining gifts of Hephaestos. But while he looked, he feared for Patroclus, that the flies might get into the wounds and breed worms in them and foul the body. Thetis reassured him, I shall drive from him the swarming and fierce things, the flies which feed upon the bodies of men who have perished. And she breathed ambrosia and blood-red nectar into Patroclus' nostrils to make his flesh stand firm. Then Thetis spoke, So go and call the Argive warriors to the muster. Renounce your rage at the proud commander Agamemnon. Then arm for battle quickly, don your fighting power. And Achilles strode along the surf, crying his piercing cry and roused Achaean warriors. The Achaeans came together, and all who had been slow and hesitant now gathered, for the anger of Achilles had long kept them from the fighting. Among them came Agamemnon, with a wound still on him, for Coon the son of Antenor had stabbed him in the fighting. Achilles stood up before them and spoke. Son of Atreus, was this after all the better way for both, for you and me, that we, for all our heart's sorrow, quarreled together for the sake of a girl? I wish Artemis had killed her beside the ships with an arrow on that day, when I destroyed Lyrnessos and took her. For thus not all these too many Achaeans would have bitten the dust by enemy hands when I was away in my anger. Still, we will let all this be a thing of the past, though it hurts us and beat down by constraint the anger that rises inside us. Now I am making an end of my anger. It has not become me unrelentingly to rage on. Come, then, drive on the flowing-haired Achaeans into the fighting, so that I may go up against the Trojans and find out if they still wish to sleep out beside the ships. Agamemnon rose from his seat and addressed them, fighting men and friends, O Danaans, henchmen of Ares, it is well to listen to the speaker. It is not becoming to break in on him. This will be hard for him, though he be able. How among the great murmur of people shall anyone listen or speak either? A man, though he speak very clearly, is baffled. I shall address the son of Peleus. Yet all you other Argives listen also, and give my word careful attention. This is the word the Achaeans have spoken often against me, and found fault with me in it. Yet I am not responsible. Zeus and fate and the Furies stalking through the night, they're the ones who drove that savage madness in my heart. That day, in assembly when I seized Achilles' prize. Ruin, eldest daughter of Zeus, she blinds us all. That fatal madness, she with those delicate feet of hers, never touching the earth, gliding over the heads of men to trap us all. She entangles one man, now another. Why? She, in her frenzy, blinded Zeus one time, highest, greatest of men and gods, even Father Zeus. Hera deceived and blind, feminine as she is, and only armed with guile. So now, since I too was blinded by 8, and Zeus robbed me of my wits, I am willing to give you all back your heart's desire, and offer you all the gifts I promised. Achilles answered, Agamemnon, lord of men, if you are willing, arm for battle now, and let the rest of us fight. I will go against the Trojans and find out if they still wish to sleep beside the ships. But Agamemnon said, Arm, then, all of you, and let us go to the plain, and we shall eat and drink, and let the gifts be brought first. Briseis was brought back to Achilles, and he wept when he saw her, for she reminded him of Patroclus and of all that he had lost. The gifts were brought, and the wine was poured, and the Achaeans armed for battle, and the fighting began. The reconciliation between Achilles and Agamemnon is one of the most important moments in the Iliad, and it is also one of the most hollow. They say the right words. Achilles says he has ended his anger. Agamemnon blames 8 for his behavior, but there is no warmth in it, no real forgiveness. The quarrel is not healed. It simply stops mattering, because Patroclus is dead and Achilles is going to die, and the honor dispute over Briseis is now meaningless. This is not a resolution, but a recognition that some wounds cannot be healed, only outlived. The armor returns. The armor that Hephaestus forged is more than protection. It is a reminder of what Achilles has lost and what he will never have again. The shield, with its images of peace and war, of harvests and dances, is a vision of the life that Achilles will never live. He will go back to the fighting, and he will kill Hector, and then he will die. The armor is beautiful, but it is a funeral shroud. Quote, "Trembling took hold of all the Myrmidons. None had the courage to look straight at it. They were afraid of it. Only Achilles looked, and as he looked the anger came harder upon him, and his eyes glittered terribly under his lids, like sunflower." Quote, "Ruin, eldest daughter of Zeus, she blinds us all, that fatal madness, she with those delicate feet of hers, never touching the earth, gliding over the heads of men to trap us all." Book 20. So these now, the Achaeans, beside the curved ships were arming around you, son of Peleus, insatiate of battle, while on the other side at the break of the plain the Trojans armed. But Zeus, from the many-folded peak of Olympos, told Themis to summon all the gods into assembly. She went everywhere and told them to make their way to Zeus' house. There was no river who was not there, except only ocean. There was not any one of the nymphs who live in the lovely groves and the springs of rivers and grass of the meadows, who came not. Poseidon asked, "Why, Lord of the shining bolt, have you called the gods to assembly once more? Are you deliberating Achaeans and Trojans? For the onset of battle is almost broken to flame between them." Zeus answered, "You have seen, shaker of the earth, the counsel within me, and why I gathered you. I think of these men, though they are dying. Even so, I shall stay here upon the fold of Olympos, sitting still, watching to pleasure my heart. Meanwhile, all you others go down, wherever you may go among the Achaeans and Trojans, and give help to either side, as your own pleasure directs you. For if we leave Achilles alone to fight with the Trojans, they will not even for a little hold off swift-footed Peleion. For even before now, they would tremble whenever they saw him. And now, when his heart is grieved and angered for his companion's death, I fear against destiny he may storm their fortress." So spoke the son of Cronos, and woke the incessant battle, and the gods went down to enter the fighting, with purposes opposed. Hera went to the assembled ships with Pallas Athene, and with Poseidon, who embraces the earth, and with generous Hermes. Ares swept down to the Trojans, helmet flashing, and pacing him went Phoebus with long hair, streaming, and Artemis showering arrows, Leto and river Xanthus, and Aphrodite strong with eternal laughter. The gods met on the plain, and the earth shook, and the sea groaned, and the mountains trembled. Athene cried aloud, and Ares cried back, and the voice of Apollo rang from the walls of Troy, and the voice of Poseidon shook the earth. The fighting broke out again, fierce and terrible, and the gods fought among the men, and the men fought among the gods, and the plain was filled with the groans of the dying. Achilles searched the plain for Hector, but Apollo put a mist around Hector and carried him away, for his time had not yet come. Instead, Apollo roused Aeneas to fight, and Aeneas came against Achilles, and the two fought spear to spear. But Poseidon was watching, and he knew that Aeneas was fated to survive, to carry on the line of the Dardanians, and he could not let him die. So Poseidon saved Aeneas, lifting him out of the battle and setting him down far away, where the fighting had not reached. The battle raged on, and Achilles killed many Trojans, and the plain was wet with blood. The river Xanthus, seeing the slaughter of his children, rose up in anger and tried to sweep Achilles away, but Hephaestus set a fire between them, and the river was turned back. The gods fought among themselves. Athene fought Ares, and Hera fought Artemis, and Poseidon fought Apollo. And Zeus watched from above, and his heart was heavy, for he knew that the war would end with the death of Hector, and that after that, the fates would take Achilles. The Trojans fled before Achilles like leaves before the wind, and the plain was strewn with the fallen. Aeneas, whom Poseidon had saved, gathered the Trojans and rallied them, and the fighting went on. Hector stood at the front, and the Trojans rallied around him, but they could not stand against Achilles. He drove through them like a fire through dry grass, and the Trojans fell like wheat before the reaper. The day wore on, and the sun moved across the sky, and still the fighting did not stop. The Achaeans pressed forward, and the Trojans gave ground, and the city of Troy seemed doomed. But Hector still stood, and the Trojans still fought, and the war was not yet over. The gods enter the war. Book 20 is the Iliad's most extraordinary expansion of its scope. The gods descend from Olympus and fight alongside the mortals, and the boundary between the divine and the human dissolves. Athene fights Ares, and Poseidon fights Apollo, and the earth shakes. The full dimension of the war opens up. It is not just a conflict between men, but a conflict between the powers that rule the world. The gods fight because they have chosen sides, and their fighting is not moral or just, it is simply power opposing power, and the mortals caught between them are crushed. Achilles unbound. With the gods now in the fight, Achilles is unleashed. He kills Trojans without mercy, and the river itself tries to stop him. He is no longer the angry young man who sat by the ships and let his comrades die. He is something else now, a force of nature, a weapon of destruction, driven by grief and rage toward his own death. Here is what it means to be a hero in the full sense. Not just to fight well, but to fight knowing that you will die, and to fight anyway. Quote, "If we leave Achilles alone to fight with the Trojans, they will not even for a little hold off swift-footed Peleon. For even before now, they would tremble whenever they saw him. And now, when his heart is grieved and angered for his companion's death, I fear against destiny he may storm their fortress." Quote, "The gods met on the plain, and the earth shook, and the sea groaned, and the mountains trembled." Book 21. But when they came to the crossing place of the fair-running river of whirling Xanthos, a stream whose father was Zeus the immortal, there Achilles split them and chased some back over the flat land toward the city, where the Achaeans themselves had stampeded in terror on the day before, when glorious Hector was still in his fury. Along this ground they were streaming in flight, but Hera let fall a deep mist before them to stay them. Meanwhile, the other half were crowded into the silvery whirls of the deep-running river and tumbled into it in huge clamor, and the steep-running water sounded, and the banks echoed hugely about them, as they outcrying tried to swim this way and that, spun about in the eddies. As before the blast of a fire, the locusts escaping into a river swarm in air, and the fire unwearied blazes from sudden start, and the locusts huddle in water. So before Achilles, the murmuring waters of Xanthos, the deep whirling, were filled with confusion of men and of horses. But heaven descended, Achilles left his spear there on the bank leaning against the tamarisks, and leapt in like some immortal, with only his sword, but his heart was bent upon evil actions, and he struck in a circle around him. The shameful sound of their groaning rose as they were struck with the sword, and the water was reddened with blood. As before a huge gaping dolphin, the other fishes escaping cram the corners of a deep-water harbor in fear, for he avidly eats up any he can catch. So the Trojans along the course of the terrible river shrank under the bluffs. He, when his hands grew weary with killing, chose out and took 12 young men alive from the river to be vengeance for the death of Patroclus, the son of Menoetius. Then the river Xanthus rose up in anger at the slaughter of his children, and spoke, "Achilles, though you are strong and a god as your father, the Trojans will not escape you forever, and the day of Troy will come. But do not fill my stream with the slain. Cease from the killing. The time for it will come, and I shall be satisfied." But Achilles did not heed the words of the river, and continued to kill. Then Xanthus called upon Apollo, "Son of Zeus, far-shooting god, your heart is angry against me, because the Trojans are my children, and Achilles kills them in my waters. Go now, and I will not help them. Let the river run with blood, and when you have had enough, I shall take the rest." And Apollo went down to the river, and his heart was filled with anger, and the river rose up and hurled its waves against Achilles, and the water rose and crashed upon him, and he was swept away. He tried to stand, but the river was too strong, and it carried him downstream. And he would have been drowned if Hera had not called upon Hephaestus to set a fire between them. The fire blazed and burned, and the water was turned back, and Achilles was saved. He stood on the bank, trembling, for even a god fears the water when it is angry. The fighting went on all day. The gods fought among themselves. Athene struck Ares with a great stone, and Hera beat Artemis about the ears, and Poseidon challenged Apollo. But Zeus watched from above and sent Iris to tell them to stop, and the gods obeyed, for the will of Zeus could not be denied. The Trojans were driven back to the city, and the Achaeans pressed forward, and the plain was strewn with the fallen. Achilles killed Lycaon, the son of Priam, who had been ransomed once before and sold in Lemnos, and who had come back to Troy only to die at the hands of the man who had captured him first. Achilles was pitiless, and he killed without mercy, and the river ran with blood, and the day wore on, and the war was not yet over. The Trojans huddled behind their walls, and the Achaeans camped outside, and the two sides faced each other in the gathering dark. And Achilles sat by the ships and wept for Patroclus, and the horses of Achilles wept too, and the night was long and cold, and the war was not yet over. The gods went back to Olympos, and Zeus sat apart from them, and his heart was heavy. He thought of the war, and of the men who were dying, and of his son Sarpedon, who had fallen at the hands of Patroclus, and of Hector, who would fall at the hands of Achilles. And he knew that the fates could not be turned aside, and that the war would end only when Troy fell, and that after that, Achilles would die. He watched the plain below, where the fires of the Achaeans burned like stars, and the city of Troy stood dark and silent behind its walls, and the river Xanthus ran red with blood, and the day was done. Man against nature. The fight between Achilles and the river is one of the most extraordinary in the Iliad. Achilles has killed so many Trojans that the river itself rises up against him. The water turns red with blood, and the river god speaks to him and tells him to stop. But Achilles does not listen. He fights the water with his sword, and the water fights back, and it takes the fire of Hephaestus to save him. Here is what Achilles has become: a force that even nature cannot contain, a violence that spills beyond the boundaries of the human world. He has become something more than a man, and something less, a killing machine driven by grief, blind to everything except the need to destroy. The limits of heroism, the river's warning, the Trojans will not escape you forever, is a reminder that even the greatest hero cannot fight against fate. Achilles will kill Hector, but he will die soon after. The river knows this, and so does Apollo, and so does Zeus. The killing in the river is not just a battle. It is a prelude to death, and the water that runs red with blood is a mirror of the blood that will soon run from Achilles' own body. Quote, "As before the blast of a fire, the locusts escaping into a river swarm in air, and the fire unwearied blazes from a sudden start, and the locusts huddle in water. So before Achilles, the murmuring waters of Xanthos, the deep whirling, were filled with confusion of men and of horses." Quote, "Cease from the killing. The time for it will come, and I shall be satisfied." Book 22. So along the city the Trojans, who had run like fawns, dried the sweat off from their bodies and drank and slaked their thirst, leaning along the magnificent battlements. Meanwhile, the Achaeans, sloping their shields across their shoulders, came close to the rampart. But his deadly fate held Hector shackled, so that he stood fast in front of Iliad and the Scaean gates. Priam saw Achilles coming across the plain, blazing like the star that rears at harvest, flaming up in its brilliance, far outshining the countless stars in the night sky. That star they call Orion's dog, brightest of all, but a fatal sign emblazoned on the heavens. It brings such killing fever down on wretched men. So the bronze flared on his chest as on he raced, and the old man moaned, flinging both hands high, begging his dear son who stood before the gates, "Do not stand there, waiting that man's attack alone. He is so much stronger than you." But Hector would not listen. He stood his ground and waited for Achilles. though his heart was pounding and his knees shook. Achilles came on like a war god, and the spear of Hector trembled in his hand. But Hector stood his ground, for he had made his choice. He thought he might kill Achilles with a well-thrown spear and end the war. But Athene was watching, and she deceived him. She appeared beside him in the likeness of his brother Deiphobos, and called, "Come, brother, let us stand and fight together." Hector was glad, and he shouted to Achilles, "I will not run from you now, as I did before. Let us fight, and one of us will die. But first let us make a compact. If Zeus grants victory to me, I will not dishonor your body, but will return it to the Achaeans. And you do the same." Achilles shook his head. "No compact with you, Hector, as there are no binding oaths between men and lions, neither between wolves and lambs, but always and forever the lamb is prey to the lion. So between you and me there can be no oaths. One of us must fall. Fight with all the strength you have." Then Athene disappeared, and Hector knew he had been deceived and that his death was near. But he did not run. He threw his spear and missed, for Athene turned it aside. Then Achilles threw, and his spear struck Hector in the throat, and Hector fell, and the dust closed over him. And Achilles stood over him and spoke, "Hector, son of Priam, you thought you could kill my friend and go unscathed. But now the dogs and vultures will eat your flesh, and the Achaeans will give you no burial." Hector, dying, spoke, "I beg you, by the gods and by your parents, do not let the dogs eat my flesh. Take the ransom that my father will give you, and give me back to my people." But Achilles answered, "Dogs and birds will have their fill of you." And Hector spoke his last words, "I curse you, Achilles. You are hard and pitiless. The day will come when Paris and Apollo will kill you at the Scaean gates." And he died, and his eyes went dark. Then Achilles stripped the armor from Hector's body, and tied the corpse to a chariot, and drove around the walls of Troy, dragging the body in the dust. The Trojans on the walls wept, and Hector's wife Andromache, who was weaving at her loom, heard the cry, and came to the wall, and saw her husband's body being dragged in the dust behind the chariot of Achilles, and she fainted, and the women of Troy wailed. Priam stood at the gates and wept, begging Achilles, "I have endured what no other mortal father has endured. I have kissed the hands of the man who killed my children." Andromache wept from the wall, holding her child as Stynax, who would grow up without a father, and who would one day be thrown from the walls of Troy. These moments linger. The grief of the father, the grief of the wife, the grief of the child who does not yet understand what he has lost. It is the aftermath of the duel. It is the heart of the sorrow. Achilles drove his chariot around the walls 3 times, and then he returned to the ships and left the body of Hector in the dust. The Trojans wept, and the Achaeans feasted, and the night came, and the war was not yet over. The body of Hector lay in the dust, and the dogs came to feed upon it, and the Trojans could not retrieve it, for the Achaeans guarded the plain. And the city of Troy mourned, and the walls wept, and the night was long and cold. The chase around Troy, the threefold chase around the walls of Troy, is one of the most tense passages in the Iliad. Hector runs, and Achilles pursues, and the Trojans watch from walls. It is as if the whole city holds its breath, waiting for the end. When Athene deceives Hector, and he turns to fight, here is a moment of terrible beauty. The hero facing his death with open eyes, knowing he is doomed but choosing to fight anyway. The most human moment in the epic, and the most tragic. Hector's death. Hector dies like a hero, but he dies knowing he was deceived by God. His last words are a curse on Achilles, and the curse is fulfilled. Paris and Apollo will kill Achilles at the Scaean gates. One cannot mourn Hector without remembering that he killed Patroclus, and that he dragged the body and tried to cut the head from the soft neck. He was a great warrior, but he was also cruel, and the Iliad does not flinch for showing both. The dragging of his body behind the chariot is a mirror of what he did to Patroclus, and a reminder that the violence of war returns to the one who perpetrates it. Quote, "As there are no binding oaths between men and lions, neither between wolves and lambs, but always and forever the lamb is prey to the lion. So between you and me there can be no oaths." Quote, "She appeared beside him in the likeness of his brother Deiphobos, and called, 'Come, brother, let us stand and fight together.'" Book 23. So they were mourning through the city. Meanwhile the Achaeans, after they had made their way back to their ships in the Hellespont, scattered, the rest of them, each man to his own ship. Except Achilles would not allow the Myrmidons to be scattered, but called out to his companions whose delight was in battle. "Myrmidons, you of the fast horses, my steadfast companions, we must not yet slip free of the chariots, our single-foot horses, but with these very horses and chariots we must drive close up to Patroclus and mourn him, since such is the privilege of the perished. Then, when we have taken full satisfaction from the sorrowful dirge, we shall set our horses free, and all of us eat here." 3 times, mourning, they drove their horses with flowing manes about the body, and among them Thetis stirred the passion for weeping. The sands were wet, and the armor of men was wet with their tears. Such was their longing after Patroclus, who drove men to thoughts of terror. Peleus' son led the thronging chant of their lamentation, and laid his manslaughtering hands over the chest of his dear friend. "Goodbye, Patroclus. I hail you even in the house of the death god. All that I promised you in time past I am accomplishing, that I would drag Hector here and give him to the dogs to feed on raw, and before your burning pyre to behead 12 glorious children of the Trojans for my anger over your slaying. They've burned the pyre, and the flames rose high, and the smoke curled into the sky. They poured wine and oil and honey upon the fire, and the body was consumed, and the bones were gathered and laid in a golden amphora. Then they built a mound over the grave, and set a stone upon it, and held the funeral games. 12 Trojans were led to the pyre and sacrificed, for Achilles had promised this to Patroclus, and he kept his word. The night was long, and the fires burned, and the Achaeans mourned, and the horses wept, and the wind carried the smoke out over the plain. At dawn the games began. Achilles set prizes for each contest: tripods, cauldrons, horses, mules, oxen, gold, and women. The chariot race was first, and 4 drivers lined up: Diomedes with the horses of Aeneas, Antilochus with the horses of his father Nestor, Menelaus with his own horses and Merions. They raced across the plain, and the dust flew, and the crowd roared, and Antilochus tried to pass Menelaus at a turn, and there was a quarrel, but Nestor's son was clever and won second place, and Menelaus was angry but held his peace. Diomedes won, for his horses were the fastest, and the crowd cheered for him. Then there was the boxing, and Epios, who was not a great fighter but a good boxer, won by default, for no one else would face him. Then there was wrestling, and Odysseus and Ajax the Greater fought to a standstill, and neither could throw the other, and the crowd cheered, for it was a great match. Then there was the foot race, and Odysseus won, for he was quick and clever, and the crowd cheered for him, for he was beloved of Athene. Then there was a fight with armor, and Diomedes won, and Agamemnon was pleased, for Diomedes was his man. And Agamemnon stood up and spoke, "The games are done, and the prizes are given. Let the Achaeans rest now, for the war is not over, and tomorrow we fight again." Achilles did not speak, for his heart was heavy, and he was thinking of Patroclus and of Hector's body, which he had dragged behind his chariot. The night came, and the Achaeans slept, and the Trojans mourned, and the city of Troy stood dark and silent behind its walls, waiting for the dawn. The mourning for Patroclus lasted many days. Each morning Achilles went to the pyre and wept, and each morning the Myrmidons gathered around him and wept with him. The horses of Achilles wept too, and their manes were wet with tears. The body of Hector lay on the ground beside the ships, and the dogs came to feed upon it. But Achilles drove them away each morning, for he would not let the body be defiled until the morning was done. He would drag it again behind his chariot each day, and each day the Trojans on the walls would weep. Andromache, Hector's wife, did not know that her husband was dead until she saw the body being dragged behind the chariot. She fainted, and when she woke, she tore her hair and beat her breast and cried. Hector, you are dead, and I am a widow, and our son Astyanax is an orphan. The dogs will eat your flesh, and the worms will breed in your wounds. Who will protect us now? Who will defend the city? Priam is old, and Paris is weak, and the other sons are dead. We are lost. Hector, we are lost. The women of Troy gathered around her and wept, and the city mourned. But the mourning had to end, for the war was not over, and the Achaeans were still camped outside the walls. Achilles knew that he would die soon, for Thetis had told him, "After Hector's death, your own death will come quickly." And he accepted this, for he had accepted it when he chose to return to battle. He would fight, and he would die, and the war would end, and Troy would fall. The funeral games were the last thing he would do for Patroclus, and after that, there was nothing left but the fighting and the dying. The games linger, as if they do not want to end. There is a beauty in the competition, in the strength of the horses and the skill of the drivers, in the way the crowd watches and cheers. The chariot race is the heart of the games, and it is described in detail, the way the dust flies, the way the horses lean into the turns, the way the drivers shout and whip their teams. It is a moment of pure athletic beauty, and it is also a moment of grief because the man who should have been driving is dead. Patroclus should have been here, should have been racing, should have been winning. But he is gone, and the prizes are given to other men, and the crowd cheers for other drivers, and the world goes on without him. And the songs remember this, even as they celebrate the games. They remember that the beauty is built on grief, that the competition is a way of coping with loss, that the prizes are symbols of what has been taken away. The funeral games are not just a celebration of life. They're a reminder of death, and here both are given at once. The joy of the living and the sorrow of the dead, tangled together like the smoke from the pyre. The games are given in the order of their importance, and the chariot race is first, for it is the most dangerous and the most beautiful. The drivers push their horses to the limit, and the chariots swerve and bounce, and the crowd holds its breath. Diomedes wins because his horses are the fastest, but Antilochos wins because he is the most clever, and Menelaos wins because he is the most patient. Each man wins for a different reason, and all are honored. Then comes the boxing and the wrestling and the foot race, and each contest is described with the same care and precision, as if the singer wants us to see every move, every throw, every punch. There are also disputes that arise during the games. Antilochos and Menelaos quarrel over the chariot race, and Nestor's son must explain himself. Odysseus and Ajax quarrel over the wrestling, and the crowd must judge. These disputes are small versions of the great quarrel between Achilles and Agamemnon, and they remind us that even in competition, even in play, there is the potential for anger and violence. Men are quarrelsome creatures. They fight over everything: prizes, honor, women, pride, and the quarrel is part of what makes them human. The funeral games. The funeral games for Patroclus are the Iliad's longest and most elaborate set piece, and they are a remarkable change of pace. After 20 books of fighting and death, here is a day of competition and celebration. The chariot races, the wrestling matches, the foot races, these are not war, but a kind of organized play, a way for the Achaeans to honor their dead by affirming their lives. The games are a reminder that the Achaeans are not just warriors. They are men who love to compete, who love the challenge of strength and speed, and who find in the games a release from the grief of war. The reconciliation. The reconciliation between Achilles and Agamemnon at the games is the final resolution of the quarrel that has driven the epic. Agamemnon gives gifts and speaks words of apology, and Achilles accepts them. But there is no warmth in it, no real forgiveness. The quarrel is not healed. It simply stops mattering, because Patroclus is dead and Achilles will die, and the honor dispute is now meaningless. This is not a resolution, but a recognition that some wounds cannot be healed, only outlived. Quote, "Goodbye, Patroclus. I hail you even in the house of the death god. All that I promised you in time past, I am accomplishing." Quote, "The sands were wet, and the armor of men was wet with their tears." Such was their longing after Patroclus, who drove men to thoughts of terror. Book 24. And the games broke up, and the people scattered to go away, each man to his fast-running ship, and the rest of them took thought of their dinner and of sweet sleep and its enjoyment. Only Achilles wept still as he remembered his beloved companion, nor did sleep who subdues all come over him, but he tossed from one side to the other in longing for Patroclus. Remembering all these things, he let fall the swelling tears, lying sometimes along his side, sometimes on his back, and now again prone on his face. Then he would stand upright and pace, turning in distraction along the beach of the sea, nor did dawn rising escape him as she brightened across the sea and the beaches. Then, when he had yoked running horses under the chariot, he would fasten Hector behind the chariot, so as to drag him, and draw him 3 times around the tomb of Menoetius's fallen son, then rest again in a shelter, and throw down the dead man, and leave him to lie sprawled on his face in the dust. But Apollo had pity on him, though he was only a dead man, and guarded the body from all ugliness, and hid all of it under the golden aegis, so that it might not be torn when Achilles dragged it. So Achilles, in his standing fury, outraged great Hector. The blessed gods, as they looked upon him, were filled with compassion, and kept urging clear-sighted Argiphantes to steal the body. There this was pleasing to all the others, but never to Hera nor Poseidon, nor the girl of the gray eyes, who kept still their hatred for sacred Iliad, as in the beginning. Now, as it was the 12th dawn after the death of Hector, Apollo spoke. Hard-hearted you are, you gods, you live for cruelty. Did Hector never burn in your honor thighs of oxen and flawless, full-grown goats? Now you cannot bring yourselves to save him, even his corpse, so his wife can see him, his mother and his child, his father Priam and Priam's people. But murderous Achilles, you gods, you choose to help Achilles, that man without a shred of decency in his heart. His temper can never bend and change, like some lion going his own barbaric way. Zeus was moved, and he sent Thetis to Achilles. Give back the body, my son. The gods are angry with you. And he sent Iris to Priam. Go to the ships of the Achaeans with gifts, and bring back the body of your son. Priam was afraid, but he listened, and he loaded a wagon with gold and bronze and fine garments. And he went out of the city by night, with Hermes as his guide, the killer of Argos, who went before him in the likeness of a young man. And the 2 of them crossed the plain in the dark, and came to the ships of the Achaeans, and no man saw them, for the guards slept, and the will of Zeus was upon them. Priam came to the shelter of Achilles, and he went inside, and he knelt before the man who had killed his son, and he kissed the hands that had killed Hector, and he wept, and he spoke. Remember your own father, Achilles, old and broken like me. Think of how he will mourn when he hears that you are dead. And think of Priam, who has lost all his sons, and who has come to you to beg for the body of the last one left to him. I have endured what no other mortal father has endured. I have kissed the hands of the man who killed my children. Achilles was moved, and he wept, for he thought of his own father, Peleus, who would never see him again. And he took Priam by the hand, and raised him up, and the 2 of them wept together, each for his own grief. Priam wept for Hector, and Achilles wept for Patroclus and for his own father. And the sound of their weeping filled the shelter, and the world was quiet around them. And for a moment the war was forgotten. Then Achilles gave back the body, and he let Priam eat and drink, and he gave him a bed to sleep on. But Priam could not sleep, for he was thinking of his son, and of the city, and of the dawn that would bring the Trojans out to bury their dead. And Achilles could not sleep either, for he was thinking of Patroclus, and of his own death, and of the father who would never see him again. At dawn Priam rose, and went back to Troy with the body of Hector, and the Trojans came out to meet him, and Andromache and Hecuba and the women of Troy wept when they saw the body. And they washed it and anointed it and laid it on a bier, and the women sang the dirge, and the men sang the dirge, and the city mourned. And Hector was buried, and the flames of the pyre rose high, and the smoke curled into the sky, and the war was not yet over. But for this one day the Trojans had their son back, and the Achaeans rested, and the silence came. The funeral of Hector was the last great event. The Trojans buried their hero with full rites, and the city wept, and the dust rose from the plain, and the fires burned on the pyre. Andromache held her child as Stynax, and wept, for she knew that the boy would grow up without a father, and that the city would fall, and that the child would be thrown from the walls. Hecuba, the mother of Hector, wept for all her sons who were dead, and for the city that was doomed. Helen wept too, for she remembered Hector's kindness to her, and for the war that had brought her to Troy, and for the husband who would never take her home. Here is the deepest grief, the grief of these women, the ones who will survive, the ones who will carry the memory of the war. And so it ends, not with a victory or a defeat, but with a funeral. The last word is not a shout of triumph, but a cry of grief, and the last image is not a burning city, but a burning pyre. Here is the whole of the war, the anger, the fighting, the death, the grief, and it ends with the simplest and the most profound of human acts, the burial of the dead. The war is not over, and Troy will fall, and Achilles will die. But for now, the dead are buried, and the living mourn, and the silence comes. The meeting of enemies, the scene between Achilles and Priam, is one of the most extraordinary in all of literature. The old king kneels before the man who killed his son and begs for the body, and the young warrior weeps for his own grief, and the two of them hold each other and weep. It is the moment when the war becomes human, when the enemy is no longer an enemy, but a father, and the hero is no longer a hero, but a son who will never go home. Here is the end of the war, the moment when the violence stops and the grief begins, and it is the most beautiful and the most terrible thing. The return of the body, the return of Hector's body, is the final act, and it is an act of mercy. Achilles gives back the body, and the Trojans bury their dead, and the city mourns. It is not a victory, and it is not a defeat. It is simply the end of a life, and the beginning of mourning. Nothing is told of what happens next, whether Troy falls, whether Achilles dies, whether the Achaeans go home. Only that the body is returned, and the city mourns, and the war is not yet over, but for this one day there is peace. Quote, "Remember your own father, Achilles, old and broken like me. Think of how he will mourn when he hears that you are dead." Quote, "And the two of them wept together, each for his own grief. Priam wept for Hector, and Achilles wept for Patroclus and for his own father." Conclusion. The Iliad is a poem that refuses to let us look away from the cost of human action. From its opening word, Menes, wrath, to its final image of burial fires, the poem traces a single arc: the catastrophic consequences of a rupture in heroic society and the slow, painful recognition that the only possible resolution to violence is grief. The poem's enduring power lies not in its battles, but in its silences, the pauses between duels, the prayers that go unanswered, the moment when an old king kneels before the man who killed his son and asks for the body. In those silences, Homer locates the deepest truth of the human condition: that we are mortal, that we are capable of extraordinary cruelty, and that we are capable of extraordinary compassion, and that both capacities coexist within the same breast. The Iliad is not a poem about victory. The Achaeans do not take Troy in these pages. They fight and die and suffer, and the city stands behind its walls, and the war goes on. What the poem offers instead is a vision of what lies beneath the fighting: the bonds between comrades, the grief of fathers, the love of mothers for sons who will never come home, and the terrible beauty of a world in which every human life is finite and therefore irreplaceable. The poem's genius is to make us feel the weight of that finitude, to make us understand that the death of one man is not a statistic but a catastrophe felt by everyone who loved him. The poem's deepest argument, that mortality is the ground of all human meaning, emerges not from philosophical abstraction but from narrative. We do not hear Homer tell us that death gives life its weight. We watch Achilles choose a short life of glory over a long life of obscurity, and we understand the choice because we have felt his grief. We watch Hector stand before the gates of Troy knowing he will die, and we admire him because we recognize in his courage the same impulse that drives us to love, to create, to act in the face of inevitable loss. The poem does not argue for the value of mortality. It demonstrates it, and the demonstration is more powerful than any argument could be. The final movement of the poem, from the death of Hector through the funeral games to the ransoming of the body, is a movement from violence to grief, from rage to compassion, from the individual to the communal. Priam's journey to the ships is the poem's last and most extraordinary act of courage. Not the courage of battle, but the courage of supplication, the willingness to kneel before an enemy and ask for mercy. And Achilles' response, his weeping, his recognition of his own father, his decision to give back the body, is the poem's final answer to the question of what it means to be human. It means to be capable of cruelty, and it means to be capable of compassion, and the highest form of wisdom is to recognize both capacities in oneself and in one's enemy. The Iliad leaves us not with resolution, but with burial. The war is not over. Troy will fall. Achilles will die. But the dead are buried, and the living mourn, and for this one night there is peace. The poem's final image is not a victory celebration, but a funeral, a community gathered around its dead, performing the last rites, affirming through ritual that the dead were loved and will be remembered. It is an image of profound sorrow and profound dignity, and it is the image with which Homer chooses to end his poem. The Iliad does not promise us that the world is just, or that the good will prevail, or that suffering has meaning. It promises us only that the dead will be buried, and that the living will remember, and that in that memory, fragile, incomplete, inevitably distorted by time, lies the only immortality available to mortals. Index of key concepts. Wrath. Many's the poem's governing principle and its opening word. Achilles' wrath is not merely an emotion, but a cosmic force that reshapes the war's trajectory, costs thousands of lives, and ultimately transforms the wrathful hero into a figure of grief. The poem begins with wrath and ends with burial, and in that arc lies its understanding of what it means to be human. Wrath is both the cause of suffering and the catalyst for the poem's deepest insights. Without Achilles' withdrawal, we would never see the full cost of the war or the limits of heroic society. Time. Honor the currency of heroic society. Time is simultaneously the source of meaning and the cause of destruction. The quarrel between Achilles and Agamemnon is fundamentally a dispute over time. Agamemnon's seizure of Briseis is an offense against Achilles' public standing. But the poem shows that time is also what binds comrades together, what motivates sacrifice, and what gives warriors the courage to face death. The tension between these functions, honor as social bond and honor as individual obsession, is the poem's central ethical problem. Kleos, glory, the only form of immortality available to mortals. Kleos is the fame that survives death through the testimony of others. Achilles chooses Kleos aphthaton, imperishable glory, over a long life, knowing that he will die young. The poem does not celebrate this choice uncritically. It shows us the cost. The dead Patroclus, the grieving Thetis, the old man Peleus who will never see his son again, and asks us to weigh the glory against the grief. Kleos is what the poem itself creates, and in that sense the poem is both the medium and the message. It preserves the memory of its heroes even as it shows us the futility of their quest for immortality. Xenos, guest friendship, the sacred bond between host and guest, sealed by shared meals and gifts. The violation of Xenia, Paris' abduction of Helen from Menelaus' house, is the war's cause and the poem's deepest moral framework. Priam's supplication of Achilles is the most extraordinary act of Xenia in the poem. The old king crosses enemy lines, kneels before his son's killer, and asks for the body. The recognition of shared humanity across enemy lines, the understanding that we are all guests in the house of death, is the poem's highest moral achievement. Moira, fate the force that governs human destiny. Moira is not a punishment, but a condition. Every character in the poem, Achilles, Hector, Priam, Patroclus, is fated to die, and the poem's power comes from watching them act within that knowledge. Moira is what makes human choice meaningful. It is because we will die that our actions matter, that the decision to fight or flee, to love or hate, to show mercy or cruelty carries the weight it does. The poem does not ask us to accept fate passively. It asks us to act with full knowledge of its inevitability. Nostos, homecoming, the longing to return home. Nostos is what separates the living from the dead. Every warrior in the poem dreams of Nostos, of seeing his wife, his children, his father's house, and every death is a Nostos denied. Odysseus's Nostos will be the subject of the Odyssey. The Iliad gives us only the longing and the knowledge that for many of the warriors, the longing will never be fulfilled. Nostos is the human counterpart of Moira. It is what makes death terrible, because death is the permanent denial of homecoming. 8. Delusion, the divine force that blinds mortals to the truth. 8 is Agamemnon's excuse for seizing Briseis. Zeus blinded me, he claims, but the poem is skeptical of this defense. 8 is real, the poem suggests, but does not excuse human choices. It complicates them, showing us how easily we deceive ourselves about our own motivations. The poem's treatment of 8 is one of its most modern insights. The recognition that human beings are unreliable narrators of their own behavior, and that the stories we tell ourselves about why we do what we do are often more fiction than fact. Supplication, haikatia, the act of kneeling before a more powerful figure and asking for mercy. Supplication is the poem's most powerful counterforce to violence. Priam's supplication of Achilles, the old king kneeling in the dust, kissing the hands that killed his son, is the poem's climactic moment, the point at which rage gives way to grief and the enemy becomes a father. Supplication requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires courage, and the poem suggests that the courage of supplication is greater than the courage of battle. Burial, Thanatos, the final act of the poem. Burial is the ritual that restores dignity to the body and meaning to the life. The poem begins with a corpse unburied. Patroclus's body lies in the dust while the fighting rages, and ends with a corpse returned to its people for proper rites. The burial of Hector is not a resolution of the war, but a temporary suspension of violence, a moment when the human need to honor the dead overrides the human need to kill. In that suspension, the poem finds its deepest hope. Not that war will end, but that even in war, the dead will be mourned. Reading comprehension questions. How does the poem's opening word, minis, establish the thematic stakes for everything that follows? What is lost when Achilles withdraws? And what does that loss reveal about the structure of heroic society? Trace the arc of Achilles' character from the wrath of Book 1 through the grief of Book 24. How does the poem transform a figure of rage into a figure of compassion? And what does that transformation suggest about the relationship between suffering and wisdom? The poem gives us two funerals, Patroclus's in Book 23 and Hector's in Book 24. Compare the emotional registers of these two scenes. What does the difference between them reveal about the poem's understanding of grief, enemy, and shared humanity? Priam's supplication of Achilles is the poem's most famous scene of reconciliation. What must both men give up in order for this moment to happen? What does the poem suggest about the cost of compassion? The Shield of Achilles, Book 18, depicts the whole human world, cities at peace and at war, harvests, dances, the sea. How does this image function within the poem? What is the relationship between the shield's vision of civilization and the war that surrounds it? Homer portrays the gods as capricious, partisan, and sometimes cruel. What does the divine machinery of the poem reveal about the nature of human agency? Are the characters in the Iliad truly free, or are they pawns of forces beyond their control? The poem ends not with a victory, but with a funeral. What does this choice suggest about Homer's understanding of war, glory, and the human condition? How does the final image of burial fires resist or complicate the heroic values that the poem has explored? Consider the role of women in the Iliad: Briseis, Andromache, Hecuba, Helen. How do their voices and their suffering complicate the poem's portrayal of heroic masculinity? What does the poem gain by including their perspectives? The poem repeatedly juxtaposes moments of extreme violence with moments of quiet grief. Achilles and Priam weeping together, Andromache weaving at her loom, the horses of Achilles mourning Patroclus. What is the effect of these juxtapositions? How do they shape the reader's experience of the war? The Iliad is a poem about the Trojan War, but Troy never falls within its pages. What does this structural choice reveal about the poem's priorities? What does it mean to tell a story of war that ends before the war is over?